I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, Tuesday, November 7th, at Vintage Hall. Lily, would you do the pledge for us tonight? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Pont?
Here.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Commissioner Knudsen?
You're supposed to be here as far as I know. He's walking in the door? Okay.
Vice Chair Hardy?
Here.
Chair Kistner?
Here. Good evening. Next item on the agenda is a public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on this agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the Commission may not engage in discussion nor take action on matters not described on this agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Is there any public comment?
Good evening. Lois Batuello, 1634 Main Street, St. Helena. And I'm here with some handouts that you can pass around. There's been some letters to the editor and other things that suggest there is no earthquake fault line traveling through St. Helena. And these are published documents that verify that there is. And I wanted to explain the reason for the confusion between geotechnical reports at this time and what's real. And that is that we do not yet have an Alquist-Priolo map showing the fault line in St. Helena, okay? State's geologists are mandated to refer to Alquist-Priolo maps. When they don't find one for St. Helena, they say there's no fault line. So until we have something for our district, officially to geologists in the state, it doesn't exist. Yet here's published information to pass around from the Chronicle the night of the Napa earthquake, which was August the 24th, 2014. Here is an analysis of what we're facing, because the USGS has a 98% probability now of a major quake, and we now have a fault line capable of producing a 7.0 magnitude earthquake, 32 times stronger than the Napa event. Okay, so this is here with the published references to the USGS maps. So if we could pass those around. The third is an example of an Alquist-Priolo map, and it'll show you why being conservative is being safe. And that is where you find the lines, and you can study them on the map, often there are fissures in the faults. And so instead of having a zone that is only 1/2 mile wide that bars development, you can have 2 miles. Now, how wide is St. Helena? And how do we know exactly where the fault line is? So here is Napa's Alquist-Priolo zoning map, okay? The other thing I tried to slip in through Bobby, because I didn't want to have to ever announce this, is the surface tracing map verifying from the USGS the fault line. What we're lacking, now, have you seen these on the commission or not? Okay. If not, please have one of these. I hope there are enough. But that was given to me by Professor Michael Austin, who's very concerned about what's going on in St. Helena and in Calistoga. Thank you very much out of ignorance. He wants people to stay safe, okay?
Thank you.
Next is the consent items. Members of the Commission or the public may ask that any item be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. Item 4.1 is the approval of the minutes for September 19th, 2017. Item 4.2, the applicant is requesting a demolition permit approval to demolish an existing 6.5 square foot barn on the property located at 627 Harvest Lane in the medium density residential district, and I'd like to pull that one.
Could we pull 4.1 as well, the approval of the minutes? Grace for
Sure. Thank you. Okay. 4.3, the applicant is seeking approval of a design review exemption to relocate the existing front entry doorway from the south street-facing facade of an existing single-family home in the northwest side of the residential district located at 1152 Church Street in the medium-density residential district. And so we've pulled, do I hear a motion to approve 4.3?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
yes.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. David, you pulled 4.1?
Yes. I just in the interest of being accuracy, I noticed on the minutes for 5.2, which I recused myself from, but it says request by Carl Dean to demolition permit and design review approval to demolish an existing single-family residence and attached garage and construct a new one-story single-family residence. It's actually a two-story. It seems like we should have accurate minutes.
All right, and 4.2 I pulled because a demolition permit must be heard by the commission. So do I have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. I'd like to invite Joseph Brockhoff, our planning intern, up to the podium. Joseph is a mid-career professional who decided to look into planning as an alternative career, and so he is working for the city as an intern, and this will be his first presentation before the Commission.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Chairperson Kistner. The applicant, Dario Vivan, is requesting a demolition permit approval to remove an existing 346 square foot barn. It's located at the rear of the property at 627 Harvest Lane. It's in the medium residential district. The rear of the property where the barn is at backs into Sulphur Creek. You can see in the diagram up there. So the applicant has agreed to dismantle the barn piece by piece to prevent any debris from falling into the creek, and I believe there's an attachment document marked work plan or manual barn removal stipulating in this application packet that the project will be conditioned. I believe it's condition 17 in the resolution that the applicant will adhere to that plan. And in addition, there's a condition that he will not use any heavy equipment, i.e. a tractor or similar heavy equipment. May be used during the dismantling of the barn. The staff analysis is that the proposed demolition doesn't conflict with any zoning standards, and that no changes are proposed to the existing single-family home, and that the demolition of the existing non-conforming construction will actually make the property more compliant with the zoning code by removing a structure that is non-compliant with the zoning ordinance's rear setbacks of 3 feet for a detached accessory unit or structure, and a creek setback of 20 feet from the top of the bank. And the barn currently straddles the property line in the rear and partially sits on the Sulphur Creek bank. In addition, the height of an accessory building is regulated by the St. Helena Municipal Code as 15 feet, and although there's no exact measurements have been taken of this, you can see by the picture that that's the applicant, Dario. He's about 6 foot, and I think if you could probably stack 3 of him up there to get to the top of that. So for these reasons, the project proposal as seen by staff is improving the property's conformance with the zoning criteria. Therefore, it's staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission accept the required findings and approve the requested demolition application for the barn at 627 Harvest Lane. That's all
Thank
I
you.
have, unless you have any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there any public comment? I'm opening public comment. Public comment is closed. David, would you like to start a discussion?
I don't really have any questions.
Okay. Well, do I hear a motion?
Well, I'd like to thank the applicant for being so thoughtful with respect to how it's going to be dismantled, and to take care that the impacts of what's going on will be at a minimum, and I appreciate that. I want to thank him for that.
Lester, you have anything to add?
I have nothing to add.
I think if we let it sit there long enough, it's going to fall down anyway, so I have no problem with it at all. Do I hear a motion to approve? 4.1 with the corrections that Commissioner Knudsen made, and 4.2. Do I hear a motion?
I so move that we accept the recommendations of the staff for 4.2 and make the changes in 4.1 that were pointed out as necessary.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. Next item is 5.1. The Driscoll Residence Project includes a request for a demolition permit, design review, and a use permit to demolish an existing single-family residence and construct a new single-family residence and detached garage at 1727 Scott Street, consistent with the small lot development standards and in the medium-density residential zone. May I have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Kistner. Good evening, Commissioners. The Planning Commission originally heard this project on June 6th, at which time they continued the project for redesign to address concerns related to massing, siting, and privacy concerns. In response to the Planning Commission direction, the applicant made the following revisions. To address massing, the applicant reduced the main volumes of the residence, removed the upstairs accessory dwelling unit over the garage, reduced depth and pitch of the porch roof at the property frontage, and replaced what was a stair tower with a shed dormer. To address siding, the applicant shifted the house such that the east side setback is now a minimum of 8 feet 3 inches to the stem wall. It was formerly 5 to 7 feet. And the west side setback is a minimum 7 feet to the stem wall. That was formerly 8 feet. This provides greater separation between the older one-story home on the east and shifts the house slightly closer to the west side property line, where it's less likely to be visually, or the west side properties less likely to be visually impacted by the proposed project. The setbacks as proposed do exceed the 5-foot minimum prescribed by small lot development standards, but remain slightly below the standard 10-foot prescribed by medium density residential. In an effort to enhance privacy, the applicant did remove the accessory dwelling unit over the garage, which there were some concerns with the sight lines from the ADU windows. And they also agreed to a condition of approval requiring installation of vegetative screening, which would probably be trees along the east property line to provide a greater level of privacy and obscure any direct sight lines between the bedroom windows. Finally, to address aesthetic concerns, the applicant revised the design to be more traditional in style and more in keeping with the typical St. Helena residential character. As detailed in the staff report, the project continues to meet the general plan and zoning standards and small lot standards. In addition, the revised project was found to meet the findings required for a demolition permit, design review, and met findings needed to approve a use permit, which is required to authorize the small lot standards. Staff did receive a follow-up public comment from the property owner of 1721 Scott, outlining some outstanding concerns related to the project. A letter was originally provided on June 6th, The most recent comment letter noted concerns related to the existing walnut trees' ability to withstand the construction phase, potential for lot-to-lot drainage, and the letter reiterated concerns related to privacy and setbacks. Staff does believe that as conditioned, the revised project makes a reasonable effort to address the concerns, particularly in terms of privacy and setbacks, while balancing the fact that the lot is indeed small and relatively narrow. In regards to the walnut tree's ability to withstand the construction phase, the Planning Commission may wish to add a condition requiring the applicant implement arborist recommended protection measures or something similar to ensure the protection and retention of the trees. And I will note that the trees are called out for being retained, but there were just some concerns about how the construction would play into that. In terms of the concern that runoff would be diverted from 1727 Scott to 1721 Scott, there is no lot-to-lot drainage permitted. And based on the preliminary drainage plans, proposed bioswales would intercept runoff from small storm events and divert it to planters to ensure no surface water would cross the property lines. And then for larger storm events, when runoff exceeds the infiltration capacity of the planters, the overflow bypasses would be provided to allow runoff to spill into an inlet and be pumped to the front northeast corner of the lot where it would enter the gutter along the street. All grading and drainage plans are subject to review and approval by the Public Works Director to ensure drainage is appropriately dealt with on site, and the Public Works Director is here to elaborate if needed. Because the revised project is found to meet all applicable standards and required findings and reasonably accounts for and responds to concerns that were voiced by the public and the Planning Commission, staff recommends that the Planning Commission find the project exempt from CEQA and adopt a resolution approving the project as conditioned. That's all I have.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions, staff?
I've got a couple, if you would. I have a couple, if you would, please.
Go ahead, John.
Let's see. If you look at the drawings, the cutaway views, A1.1.
John, would you speak in your mic so we can hear you, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's all right. If I can't hear you,
You have a
can't hear
drawing of the original design and then the proposed design, specifically A1.1.4 and A1.1.3. If you notice, the first drawing appears to have a guardrail around that second-story deck. The second drawing, the guardrail does not appear. Is there to be a guardrail? Is it to be moved? Is the deck to be closed? What's exactly going on there?
I am going to defer to the architect on that.
All right, we'll have him
Okay.
answer that when he comes up.
Okay.
When he comes up.
A second question, if you would please. The two letters that we got before the meeting started, the response from, I presume it's the applicant's engineer, reads in part, which states that the runoff from the 10-year storm event needs to be intercepted and released at the property frontage along Scott Street. So the city's limit on retaining stormwater runoff on your property is a 10-year event? That's awful tiny, considering we've had 3 200-year events in the past few years. I don't know if a 10-year retainage is enough.
Yeah, I might defer to Erica on that.
That has been the past practice of the city. I could look into that further, but that's what we've been doing for at least the past year, 2 and 10-year events. Because anything beyond that, it's how do you retain a 100-year flood? I mean, that's not supposed to be. If it's a public structure, I can see the argument there, but a private.
Well, but it says needs to be intercepted and released at the front of the property. It doesn't say it need to be retained.
I have not seen that comment from the engineer,
well,
but
let me read it to you. This is a condition posed by the city which states that runoff from the 10-year storm event needs to be intercepted and released at the property frontage along Scott Street. Not that it be retained on the property, but be directed to the front of the property.
So in this case, if the property if you can get to the front of the property and drain to the gutter system, which is preferred to go to the storm drains,
Right.
they need to retain it on the property, get treated, pre-treated. It's practicality, 2-year and 10-year flow should go through the pre-treatment process, the bioretention swale, or your,
Right.
as far as our new requirements passed down through the EPA, through the state, through us. But that's our
permit,
requirements, is the 2 and 10-year. Anything beyond that, you're in the case of
This
excessive stormwater.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying tenure needs to be retained, right?
Filtrated
But-
and then
but-
released out to the street.
The way this sentence is written, it appears to read to me such that anything over 10-year is off the books. In other words, it doesn't have to be directed to the front of the property. It can sheet flow across your neighbor. It can sheet flow anywhere. So I'm asking what the standards are. This letter implies, the way it's written, that after an event reaches a 10-year standard, all bets are off.
Correct.
Okay. So that means we had multiple 10-year events last year. In fact, every darn storm that came in practically was a 10-year event. So we'll sheet flow across to the neighbors.
It will do what it's doing now, basically.
Mhm.
But anything in a traditional, what we've experienced in the past, until rules and regulations have changed to increase that amount of rainfall, this is what we are with.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if it said, okay, anything over 10 years needs to be directed out to the street. But anything over 10 years goes whichever way the wind blows. Is a little hard. Yes. is a little hard to take given our current conditions, where storms are expected to go, more violent, probably less often, but more rainfall. Excuse me for talking about global warming, but there we are.
These are all good questions, though, to bring up to the next, when they do have the more draft updates for the Bay Area, the stormwater.
I don't know if I want to increase your NPD's permit problems, but 10 years does seem like an awful small number. I mean, I don't mind 10 years retained on the property. I don't mind anything above 10 years needs to go out the street. But anything above 10 years can go anywhere it wants to go. That may get a little tough, particularly for the neighbors, particularly if you're a low-lying neighbor.
I think that's status quo. Thank you. I think it really is status quo, and has been for a long time. If anything, what's changed, to the best of my knowledge, working on projects in recent years, is the adoption of the stormwater management regulations by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, which deal not simply with attenuating runoff flows, but with pretreatment. And to the best of my knowledge, they have effectively superseded older stormwater regulatory schemes, which were less costly and less restrictive on property owners. So unless I'm missing something here, the requirements applied to this project represent the current state of stormwater regulation across the state. The regulations work differently. They're tiered, if I recall correctly, according to the size of the project. So larger projects have more stringent requirements, but I'm hard-pressed to see how applying those requirements to this piece of property in any fundamental way alters the situation in a big storm as compared to any other part of St. Helena.
The kicker to me in this one, Commissioner Hardy, is the basement. It's a large basement. It's going to change subsurface flows. I imagine the basement is kept dry by sump pumps. It's not being done as a boat section. So that's not only going to add to the water loading, it's going to change the subsurface water directions.
I'm unpersuaded that's something we need to address on a project-specific basis, but that's just my opinion.
Maybe not, but it is a concern when you're talking about flows. We anticipate flows to become larger and larger and more aggressive. And I know the NPD's permits becoming larger and larger and more progressive getting one.
Yeah, I truly don't believe, given the current regulatory scheme, that it makes sense for St. Helena to try to get out ahead of the Clean Water Act and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We're in an era, and have been for decades, of increasing stormwater management requirements. It seems to me the only prudent thing to anticipate is that they will become more exacting over time. And I don't think in this case, with this issue, it's a place for St. Helena to expend its resources. I think we're doing well enough, frankly, if we manage to keep up with the regional board and apply the standards. Honestly.
I would tend to agree with that, given how restrictive and difficult it has been to get those permits, particularly on a citywide or countywide basis. But nonetheless, it's a concern. It remains a concern, and 10 years is an awful small number. It really is.
No, agreed, and especially in changing weather patterns. But that's where we are.
The neighbor does have some legitimate concern about drainage from the property in question onto their property. There is a legitimate concern there.
If I may assist the commission in their discussion to know that the drainage will be designed by a civil engineer, meet all state mandated requirements, which is essentially where our condition comes from, and the sump pump will drain to the front of the property. That's how they're designed, typically to meet to the stormwater gutter system.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question for staff. First of all, I'd like to commend Planner Bianco for helping guide the client. This is a much better looking design, so thank you. That was definitely a response to our requests back many months ago. The second question I have, though, is about so they've removed the second unit on top of the garage, but they could at some point later elect to add that back in. Is that not correct?
I believe that they are they're relatively close to maxing out their floor area ratio, but they do, there is that 400 square foot exemption. So, they would be confined. I don't know off the top of my head whether or not they could accommodate it at this, with how things stand now, and comply with setbacks and other restrictions, because they are required to comply with the MDR standards. But conceivably, if they came to us with a project that proposed a 400 square foot accessory dwelling unit that complied with all of the applicable standards in our ADU ordinance, then, it would be subject to ministerial approval. So conceivably, yes, but I'm not sure that they could really accommodate that with how the site's developed.
Right. The only way that it could be accommodated would be go back on top of the garage. So, not to wonder if, someone could remove it and then add it in later, just as a matter of course. I just wonder if there's a way for some of these approvals that we can say, build it as is, and actually because you're maxing out FAR everywhere else, you don't get another unit. Perhaps that's a hypothetical question.
Not under the current zoning ordinance we have.
However, we can change that requirement as we rewrite the municipal code. Is that not correct?
I think we'd have to eliminate the exemption.
That's
That's
correct.
what I
So
meant.
That'd be the cleanest way.
ADUs are allowed as a by right ministerial action. However, in this case, since a majority of the floor area ratio is taken up by the primary unit, if the commission were to eliminate the ability for an ADU to have an exemption from FAR, floor area ratio, then that would preclude the addition of that in this example.
Could we include that now with the conditions?
That's a zoning ordinance. It requires 2 readings and approval by the city council.
That's what I thought. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions?
Would a change like that affect the housing element?
Senior Planner Heacock just mentioned that to me, that the housing element has numerous policies which support the development of ADUs, accessory dwelling units.
Well,
There might be a way of addressing that, because right now we have no statistics on how many of those are occupied, who they're occupied by, or if they've been used. I think you could do a statistical analysis,
So this is accurate. We're getting a little bit off topic here, but staff does intend to bring a accessory dwelling unit discussion back to the Planning Commission in the near term.
I think we've asked for that before. All right. Any more questions? Would the applicant like to speak?
I still have the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The question I asked that wants to be answered by the architect or engineer. The railing on the second story that doesn't appear in the drawings.
The applicant's going to speak now.
I thought I was going to have the engineer answer that one. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Kistner. Good evening, Commission. My name is George Bevan with Bevan Associates. We're the architect of record for this project. Thanks, Ms. Bianco, for reading my notes that I was going to present tonight. This is a continuation. Our office took this very serious, your feedback on those 3 elements: massing, setbacks, garage redesign. And, the more I look at this, we're much closer to the project as, more than you guys, but I wanted to just highlight a couple things just to piggyback on Ms. Bianco that, indoor, outdoor living, we're in California. This project is, as you could see on A111, the street view, not only did we take the unit off the garage, but there was a significant modern element suggesting that it could be full 2-story in height. So the redesign, actually, I'm just pointing out that is a quasi-story and a half, with the dormer. So still, suggesting or encouraging natural light into that staircase, but taking those 2-story elements off, and then further increasing the layering of the massing from the street. We're very proud of this redesign from the sides of the project, the pushing and pulling and the architectural articulation of, patios, upstairs decking, the roof lines all remain soft and less boxy, if you will. I just, I could now answer the railing question, I guess.
Please.
On that same, so the change that should have been included is the same railing is actually now set back to. May I address the screen, maybe? Should be right here. So it no longer, this is actually technically roof now. So the deck, the exterior deck has been reduced, so to speak. So that railing is removed and now starts only at this corner and goes to the to this roof line, and that's it. So it's reduced.
It just doesn't show in the drawing.
It's just not showing that, unfortunately. It's not on the drawing. The drawing shows all the way out. Any other questions by the commission of me? We do actually have Kim and Brian Driscoll, the owners, our client, here this evening, and their son, a local winemaker as well. So if you have any questions directly for them. I did have, as it's been pointed out, my civil engineer type that to address the water situation that we've been talking about. The owners have contacted an arborist today regarding the conditions of the trees and what they can remove or not, including contacting the city too. So they have some information on just what they could do with the trees. Privacy is an issue for both the neighbor and us as well. So appreciate it.
You want to speak? Would you identify yourself, please?
Oh, yes, sure. I'm Brian Driscoll. I'm the
Thank
property
you.
owner along with my wife, Kim. We're very excited about this project. We'd like to get it underway. I think we've been sensitive to all of the concerns that have been expressed to us and feel confident that the steps we're taking are going to properly address them. I was the CEO of Diamond of California for 4.5 years, so I know a good walnut tree when I see one. And one of them is not particularly healthy, so I'm not sure if it's going to survive any attempt to try to save it, but we're willing to take whatever steps are necessary to try to do that. So I appreciate the feedback, and I think we are in a better place than we were before, frankly, so that the feedback you've given us, I think, has worked to everyone's advantage, and hopefully, with what you've heard this evening, you'll approve this accordingly, and we'll get on with the project. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now open public comment. Does anyone wish to comment?
I wanted to just, my name's Sue Tipp. I am at the property 1721. I wrote the letter. I'm not going to rehash all of this. I think the project has come along. It looks great. I'm not opposed to anything other than just that privacy factor and, what Commissioner Ponte brought out. Notoriously, we flood. My basements are full. And that water being misplaced with, the underground, the cellar that they're putting in, I just can't imagine the trees surviving. So I ask that if they don't survive, that we can come up with something that'll provide some privacy, because that sleeping porch will look right across the property. So I just wanted to, just represent my house and the 35 years that I've been there and raised my kids there, and just want to retain a little privacy and, welcome to the community. And my intention is just to be protective. So anyway, I appreciate everything that's been said. Consider one thing I wanted to bring up is there are no curbs on Scott Street from that property down. So that water goes everywhere, goes into my driveway, floods my driveway. So something will have to be addressed to that, either, with them and me, most likely, bringing more water down to the corner. So that's something I guess we'll all have to work on. But I just wanted to just say something. So thank you.
Thank you very much. No, shouldn't there be curbs there?
The project, I believe, has been conditioned to install curb gutter sidewalk.
Okay. Is there any further public comment? I'll close public comment.
I have another question for staff then.
Okay.
So, Director Hausch, does that mean with curb gutter that there would actually be drainage then right at that property? Is that what that implies? That there would actually be a storm drain?
Well, it is not a storm drain. So I'm not familiar with the storm drain system on this street, but essentially as properties redevelop and they're in areas where we've identified the need for sidewalks, we get them with these types of redevelopment.
Got it.
I have a question for Erica then. Erica, do you know how far it is to the nearest storm drain inlet?
I would have to get back to you on that one. I don't have the maps with me.
Bobby, would you like to open comments?
Well, that could be a way to address this water issue, would be sort of a storm drain opening requirement. I don't have a sense of that, but
There's likely not the nexus to require the applicant to install a storm drain. Especially we can't speak to it here without knowing the proximity of the existing storm drain system.
And perhaps just to explain that to the commission, when people have pumps that are taking excess water out of their property, it's generally not hooked directly into the storm drain system. It's hooked into the street, which then flows into the storm drain. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
John, would you like to open the discussion?
Well, I wasn't here when the original project was done, but I do appreciate the changes that I see. It's a cool design. My only problem with this kind of project is that what I've seen in the past several projects has been designs that push the FAR numbers as hard and as far as they can. And this is another example of that. I can understand why it's a small lot. It's not a huge house. But nonetheless, we keep pushing those FAR numbers really, really hard. This one's within, what, 1/1000th of the maximum? That's really pushing it. And that's fine, but I really do agree that we need to do something about those exemption numbers, because as it stands now, as we approve this one, they could come in and apply the next day for a ministerial permit for a 400 square foot addition. And the setback rules are different on that as well, I believe, aren't they?
It depends. So they primarily generally meet the requirements of the primary dwelling, but in certain circumstances they get reduced setbacks.
Yeah. So it could potentially fit. And that is neither here nor there on this particular structure. But it is something I think we need to consider addressing in the relatively near future, given the changes in state laws on accessory dwelling units.
David?
Yeah. When we get to it, I think we should reduce FAR. But right now the rules are what they are. I like the redesign. I think it's a far better massing of the way they've done the roof structure, this, that, and the other thing. It's maxed out. It just sort of is.
Mr. Hardy?
I think, in general, I agree with the other commissioner comments. Land in St. Helena becomes ever more valuable over time, so far as I can tell. So we're going to see projects that build to or close to the limit of the FAR, no matter what the FAR scheme is, and so I don't have any objection to the fact that this project does that. If we don't like the result, then it is, as has been suggested, our business to review the FAR. And I do think, looking ahead, that when we're looking at the FAR, we should be looking at the second dwelling unit issues as well. I think that the two need to be addressed together. But that's all I think it's appropriate to say about that at this time. With respect to drainage on the street, there I am concerned just because we don't have much information on how the street actually drains. We've heard a neighbor who's been there for decades recount that actually it drains very poorly in major storms. I have no sense of how it works, but it does seem clear that in a neighborhood where curbs and gutters are non-existent or only existent here and there according to when properties were built or remodeled, then essentially you've got sheet flow on the street moving according to how the street's been designed. I don't know if it's crowned or what. I just have no idea, and I guess really all I can say to staff is that it's probably an appropriate subject for some analysis and information for the commission in the future in these blocks or neighborhoods where we don't have an existing storm drain system with curb and gutter, resulting in a fairly predictable and easily comprehended result when someone develops a new property, adds a cellar, and starts pumping from the cellar to the street. Because the potential I see for change there is most significantly in what's happening in the street. I suspect with respect to what's happening in a neighboring basement, if anything, it's a plus. We're going to create some kind of cone there as the pump is pumping out the cellar. I don't know how far that influence goes, but the result is we're putting more groundwater in the street. And there, again, I don't have any sense from this staff report whether that condition is well managed at present or poor and to some extent quantifiable or not exacerbated by the project. So let's look at that in the future when parcels like this are developed. That's all I have to say. I think the applicant has done a solid job of responding to previous comments. It's reflected in the staff report and the record, and I don't have any issues with the design.
Ms. Bonnet?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear other commissioners talk about, what I see as a problem and have been seeing as a problem in voting as if it were a problem for a long time, always pushing out to far, seeing far as the requirement rather than the limit. It's like the speed limit, if it's at 65, it doesn't mean you have to go 65. You have to use your discretion, and the Planning Commission uses our discretion as to whether the FAR is appropriate. And it's not just that it's allowed, is it appropriate under the conditions? And my sense is when you have a small lot, you should build small. And you should build so that there's maximum privacy and space, even that if it means making a smaller building. And so I really think, and also with the trees in mind, I heard the applicant say that if whatever needs to be done to save the trees, if a 10-foot setback would save the trees, then I would really like to see that happen, not just for the trees, but also for the neighbor, in terms of space. And I don't think the privacy issue has been well addressed. There's a deck that's up high, looking down on bedrooms, and it's really a nice design. I don't blame you for wanting that, but it doesn't seem to me to be responding sincerely to the request for a design that would provide more privacy for the neighbor who has complained. So I would like to see that deck not there, and a small, and the whole thing moved 10 feet from each side, and whatever square footage would have to be changed for that would be changed. And to set a precedent here that until we change the FARs, whatever the FARs are, they are maximum. They're not the required amount or the amount that you should necessarily strive to go. I mean, you have to really look at the circumstances of the location, neighbors, the ambiance of wherever the building is going to be built. So I would want to see further change in these two areas.
And I have to say that I basically agree with Commissioner Monette and the fact that I believe that the privacy issues between the two houses has not been addressed. I don't know if you can do something with the windows in those in the bedroom or not, and I don't know if there's some screening that you can put on your deck, but I do think that, and it's something that's above someone else's bedroom is not acceptable to me. So that's where I'm at with this, and I went through this several times today because I really was concerned with it. I think you've made some attempt, but I don't know if there's something else you can do with those windows. Those are big windows, and I think they look right on down on your neighbor's property there, and particularly her bedroom. Certainly.
So first of all, appreciate the feedback. I don't agree with it. I think to suggest that this wasn't a sincere attempt to make a change is unfortunate, because I think it was a sincere attempt and a very.
I didn't feel it was.
Commissioner Monette said it wasn't.
Okay,
was not
I
a sincere
did not say that was. Mean
no,
it was
I know you
insincere.
didn't,
All right.
Commissioner Monette.
That was a poor choice of words, and I couldn't think of anything else.
Okay, because I think it was a rather substantial step we took to address the concerns. We're surrounded by two-story homes in the neighborhood. I can go up and down the street and count possibly 12 to 15 homes with 2 stories. Our next-door neighbor has a 2-story home. This house does have our neighbor does have a first-level bedroom, but the roof would block our ability to look down from it. And by the way, I have no interest in looking down into someone's bedroom. I think we could put sufficient landscaping in place to address that. In terms of massing, we are beneath the limit. We are, I think, in the 1,900 square foot range with an allowance, I believe, to be about 2,200 square feet. I could be off, give or take, but we did come down beneath it. So we're not pushing the envelope on this by any means. Look, this is something we believe we've addressed head on, and have no interest in progressing with this project. If this is the requirement, I'll put it up for sale tomorrow and be very clear about why this issue exists. This is just unfortunate and it feels unfair. We've taken substantial.
I'm Kim, his wife.
Come to the microphone.
Yes.
Yeah,
so we can hear you,
Sorry
please.
about that. I'm Kim. The deck that's in the back, we purposely placed it so that it was in line with her, I guess it's the garage. It does not go anywhere over her windows. If you walk the property, that upstairs balcony, deck, or whatever it is, and it's not overlooking her house, the bedroom windows or whatever. It's further set back where the cars are parked. We did that on purpose because we wanted the privacy. And if anything, not that you guys would know this, the greenery would be up there also because we want privacy too.
But I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I also believe our neighbor just said that if we address the landscaping issue, that you would not have a problem. I don't want to speak for you, but that's what I interpreted from your comments, that if the walnut trees didn't make it, then have sufficient landscaping to prevent the privacy issue. So you just heard the neighbor herself say that, and I'm confused why you would object to it.
I don't object to it. I did a building in Thousand Oaks. I understand the trees pretty well.
No, I'm suggesting that we will take
I know there's a
whatever
way
necessary.
you can save the trees. I have no doubt about that.
Or put in sufficient landscaping otherwise to prevent the privacy becoming an issue.
Thank you.
Just to let you know, Mr. Driscoll, the staff report shows your calculated floor area ratio at 0.353. The maximum is 0.354. You're within 1/1000th
Is that right?
of your maximum.
Yeah.
Go to the cover sheet. That would be helpful because it's all spelled out on the first sheet.
If you're going to speak, please come up to the microphone so we
You
can
can
hear
explain it better than I can.
You know, what we're looking at shows you're within 1/1000th of your maximum floor area ratio, as calculated currently.
Hi, I'm Joel Mendelson. I'm one of the architects on this, along with George. Thank you. That's exactly what I needed. So the FAR is, as you guys know, it's 0.358, and the conditioned area of the house is 1,994. Now, by right, basically, we have 2,000 square feet to work with, so we are under the FAR. The max allowable is 2,000 square feet.
You said you were within 1/1000th.
But that's parsing a decimal, where what I'm trying to say is we are actually not pressed right up against the FAR. We are about 6 below. So to answer your question, I think we're within right for the house.
The FAR is calculated as a ratio. I read it as a ratio. You're turning it into square feet.
I think that's enough of that. I don't think...
to be honest, we work very closely with staff to arrive at that number. It's not that we arrive at it from our own tables. We work with them. So without clear guidelines, it's impossible to design to a standard, that makes sense to us. If it was 1995, we would be under that number. And I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to state that. Otherwise, we are dealing with moving targets all the time.
All right. Well, can we condition it that they have to do the landscaping until it works?
Absolutely. So the design guidelines, the criteria by which design review is decided includes landscaping requirements, and so the commission can condition that the existing trees be maintained, and then if they are impacted by the construction to the point where they are not, typically you put a time frame, if they die within a 1-year period after construction is completed, then they must be replaced, and you can even stipulate the size of the tree that they must be replaced with. You could say deciduous or evergreen. The commission has a fair amount of leeway in what landscaping requests they could make or conditions in order to maintain the privacy issues.
I have another question for you, Director Hausch. Could we stipulate as an approval of this that the garage remain a 1-story garage?
You could likely stipulate that it remain a 1-story garage. However, as soon as if there was a request to construct an ADU, essentially the state law would supersede any stipulation over the garage height.
The other question that our Public Works Director raised with me is that it appears that it's simply a sidewalk that's been required, not a sidewalk and a curb. Is that correct?
It already exists.
Oh, the sidewalk exists.
The sidewalk exists. They have to bring up to ADA requirements.
Oh. Is there a curb then?
There's no curb. There's like a landscape strip in front of it.
Okay. Thank you. This is really complicated and confusing. I would support it, though.
I would support it with the landscape stipulation. Do I hear a motion?
Move the project with the landscape stipulation for the trees.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
I just said move the project with the landscape stipulation for the trees.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Pont?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hardy?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
No.
Commissioner Knudsen?
Yes.
Chair Kistner?
Yes.
I'd like to make just one additional comment to my
Go ahead.
fellow commissioners and room at large. Saline is changing, and the change is often least comfortable for those of us who've been here a long time. I'm not entirely happy with it on a block that's changed relatively little. But I believe personally that it's important to accept the nature of what's going on, especially with respect to things that we really can't control, like property values and changes in lifestyle and how those two things affect what makes the most sense to property owners for design of a home. It does not seem to me, whether as an individual citizen or as a planning commissioner, that my personal aesthetic, which would be difficult to satisfy for anyone, myself included, is the right lens with which to look at these things. And so, my comments about FAR should be understood in that light. It's not that I like the result necessarily of what we see, but rather that it is a tendency everywhere one goes for property to be developed to something close to its highest and best use, and we've established a scheme that sets a limit, and so I accept the fact that then we're going to see people doing what we've allowed to the greatest extent possible. And I appreciate Commissioner Manette's comments on the exercise of discretion. It's certainly true that the maximum allowed isn't something that we're required to approve. I do appreciate that. But as a general trend, I think what we see is indicative, and I also believe that this record reflects a sincere effort to respond to comments, and I'm happy to have voted to approve it. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Can I say one little thing more too? Even though I voted against it, I do appreciate the dilemma that you're in, because when you're, the city is saying, this is where this is okay, and I've been on here a long time, and I remember for several years before everyone except Grace was on the Planning Commission, it seemed clear that we were going in a different direction. I think what Commissioner what's your
Hardy
name?
is his name.
Hardy. It's still Hardy.
I'm nervous. What Commissioner Hardy said is true, and it I just don't know what the mandate is. It's not personal. I feel that we had a mandate to keep things on a certain scale, and that's where I'm coming from. But we're all learning as we go along, and I wish you well.
And that's why we have to change code. Do you need further direction on the landscaping, or Lily?
Maybe a little bit. There is a condition now that specifies that they increase landscaping to provide a greater level of vegetative screening. Do you want a condition that applies specifically to retention of the walnut trees? Or do you want me to expand that condition?
To trees.
To
Yes.
trees in general.
And I think we've got to have at least a 15.
Retention and replacement.
And replacement,
correct.
if
Yeah.
it
Right.
doesn't withstand.
And I'm
Over a period
assuming
of time, I believe.
that at construction stage, the effect of the approval is to require a landscaping plan approved at staff level.
Yeah, prior to building permit.
Prior to issuance of the permit.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And then I'm assuming, and we should reopen the matter and address this if I'm wrong, that with respect to replacement of the trees, that a modification of that plan would also go to staff. Should new plantings be required in order to maintain the screening as a result of the loss of the walnuts?
I wonder if we could maybe address that up front, that you're going to put in these protective measures to retain it. If for some reason it's unable to withstand the construction phase, then you'll do replacement at this level, these size box trees, something along those lines.
That was how staff understood the direction from the commission.
And that's what I meant. I don't want you to put a sapling
But I think also the sense was the screening from that second floor master bedroom, which may not be covered by the existing walnut trees. Doesn't appear so.
Yeah, and that's what the condition that staff added was meant to address, knowing that the placement of the walnut trees doesn't totally screen that.
So there is a condition regarding landscaping adjacent to the balcony. The commission could, well, the vote's already been cast. We will review the landscape plan thoroughly, and I'm sure the applicants understand the intent of the commission and the neighbors when they propose their design.
Okay? Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Oh, there's other business. There's other business? Oh.
Yes, I believe so, unless you want to join us.
No, thank you.
I think you've heard enough. Huh?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kistner and members of the commission. Item 5.2 is a mitigated negative declaration, use permit, and design review for the St. Helena Custom Crush project. As mentioned in the project description, negative declaration, design review, and use permit applications requesting approval to construct an approximately 9,500 square foot addition to an existing approximately 110,000 square foot building to operate a custom crush winemaking facility capable of producing 120,000 gallons of wine. And the property is located at 420 La Fata Street, or also known as 890 Dowdell Lane in southeast St. Helena. And it's important to note that no wine tasting or visitation is permitted or being requested as a part of this project. The project is identified, as I mentioned, in southeast St. Helena, identified here with the red star. It's on the corner of Dowdell and La Fata. This slide demonstrates the property's general plan and zoning designations, with gray being industrial. It's essentially the one of two industrial areas in St. Helena. So this is an aerial photograph of the existing development. It's worth noting the addition would be located essentially in that area where the red arrow is. And please also note the intersection of Dowdell and La Fata, as that will be a topic of discussion later in the presentation, but that is where the proposed stormwater detention basin is proposed to be. The current detention basin is in the location of the red arrow, as identified on the aerial photograph. The next slide, this is the site plan for the design, so it's transitioning that aerial photograph to the paper design. La Fata's on the bottom and Dowdell's on the right. The original building outline is the yellow line there. The proposed addition is the red square. That's approximately 9,500 square feet. The project also includes the use of about 4,500 square feet of existing square footage within the building, and that's currently occupied by the Britton Tree Service. And then finally, the location of the stormwater detention basin, just to kind of orient everyone to the different features on the property. This slide is essentially the same thing, but just showing the roof lines of the buildings. The elevations, it's important to note that the project height is measured to the top of the cupola, so most of the massing is not to the maximum height that's proposed. That does incorporate lights, so there will be some natural lighting. It's also worth noting that the design identifies board and bat or metal siding, but however, the project has been conditioned to build with board and bat, so that's a condition that staff placed on the project to clarify the design intent. And then moving into the analysis. So as mentioned, the project is in the industrial general plan designation, which is, from the staff perspective, the project is a very excellent implementation of that district. As identifies, the industrial designation is intended for light manufacturing, farm-related equipment sales, viticultural support services, and similar compatible uses. And then later in the general plan, it talks about as an industrial or agricultural service center, St. Helena needs to accommodate industrial-type uses that support the region's agricultural and winemaking industries. That's specific quotes from the general plan, and staff felt that was appropriate to reference. In addition, as you saw in the staff report, there's several policies from the general plan that were discussed and referenced in review of the project. I'll just mention a few now. 2.6.54 identifies support the development of only those industries that are consistent with the agricultural and environmental values and the role of the city as an agriculturally based service center for the surrounding area. And then 2.6.55 identifies that the city should ensure that industrial projects are designed and sited so as to provide a positive image of the community. Landscaping and setbacks should be utilized to minimize visual impacts. There's a full or a broader response from staff identified in the project's compliance with the general plan and the staff report. Moving on to the zoning code, similarly, the project is zoned for industrial land uses. The zoning code is specifically identified, the industrial district is specifically identified as providing for light manufacturing, viniculture and winery support services, and similar compatible uses. With regards to development criteria, the project includes 20-foot setbacks from all public streets for the structures. Building heights are limited to a maximum of 45 feet, and the maximum floor area ratio is 0.5. There are very specific landscaping requirements and parking requirements in this zoning district, as in all others. Staff find that the design of the addition proposes a 40-foot setback from façade, so doubling the requirement from that street. The maximum height is proposed, or the height of the building is proposed at 38 feet. There is a significant amount of landscaping, which exceeds the requirement for 10% in an industrial designated area. And the project does meet the 15-foot landscape buffer dimensions. It does also provide 88 parking spaces, which by staff's analysis was the most conservative interpretation of the code that could have been taken by the applicants with regards to how they reviewed the project. It's worth noting that this property has been occupied by numerous uses throughout the years and was originally approved with a use permit that allowed industrial and office uses. The zoning code breaks up parking analysis for warehouses up to 10,000 square feet, which I could be referencing the wrong square footage. I'm sorry. So basically it has two different parking requirements. Once you get over a certain size, the parking requirements are reduced. However, the applicant described their warehouse as several small warehouses within one, and therefore triggered a higher parking count in their analysis, and they do meet that. So that's an example of how they're very conservative in their parking analysis for the project. It's also worth noting that, so in staff's analysis, the project does generally meet the zoning code. There is one area with regards to the setback of the fence surrounding the detention basin, which will be discussed later. An initial study was proposed or was conducted on the project, which resulted in the preparation of a mitigated negative declaration. This analysis was supported by numerous studies, including a stormwater control plan, a well yield analysis, a water use analysis, which did identify compliance with the city's water neutrality requirements, sewer capacity study, septic feasibility analysis, and a traffic report. All those copies or all those studies were included as appendices to the negative declaration and have been provided to the Commission since the public review timeframe. The analysis identified potential impacts to air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, hydrology, and water quality. However, all of those impacts were mitigated to less than significant levels. Staff also conducted a AB 52 consultation, and the Yoka Dihi tribe is the only one that responded. However, they did not identify any concerns with the project and and requested no further consultation. The project environmental consultant is here, Olivia Irvin from M Group. I believe the traffic engineer is also in the room, as is Mrs. Olford, and the architect from Valley Architect, who designed the building. So the applicants do have their whole team of the applicant team here, to respond to any questions or concerns that the Planning Commission might wish to discuss. There's a whole analysis in the staff report identifying how the project does meet the requirements of the use permit and design review criteria as identified by staff. And so with that, we'll get into the primary issue that staff identified with the proposed project, which is the detention basin location and the fence height proposed. So as mentioned, there is a detention basin which is located at the corner of La Fada and Dowdell, proposed to be. Currently, there's a detention basin which is located in the area of the addition. That existing detention basin is relatively shallow and does not trigger the requirement for a fence. However, once detention basins get over a certain size, and depth is the criteria, similar to a swimming pool, they're required to be surrounded by a safety fence to prevent any unfortunate accidents. This location was identified by staff as essentially the primary concern because of the potential for aesthetic impacts. When detention basins, the stormwater requirements really started ratcheting up, detention basin design was seemed to be an afterthought, and they often were giant kind of ponds in the middle of development surrounded by barbed wire, and were not the most attractive design that folks saw. They've evolved significantly. This is 10 to 15 years ago, but they've evolved significantly. But it's worth noting that detention basins do require a protective fence because unlike a swimming pool, there's no alternative method of meeting that safety requirement. A swimming pool could put alarms on the surface of the water that'll sound if someone falls in. They can use automated covers. Detention basins cannot do that to meet the safety requirements. So, getting to the main issue, which is the location, from staff's perspective, is the location of the fence that surrounds this. The Chapter 1760 of the Industrial Code states that no fences over 3 feet are allowed in the front setback. Front setback of an industrial zoning district is 20 feet. As I mentioned, the fence is a requirement of the building code. Staff does support the proposed fence design and location based on the intent of the code. If the commission has concerns over it, there is a redesign that is possible that would push the fence setback outside of that setback area to 20 feet. I'm not sure that the applicants are supportive of that, but it would reduce a significant amount of the landscaping that's currently in the design. And so staff wants to just also show this is essentially a cross-section that's provided by the applicants as to what that design would look like. The project has been conditioned to incorporate the redwood trees that are fronting onto Dowdell, as well as incorporate a significant amount of additional landscaping, including trees, to both mitigate the potential aesthetic concerns of the design of the detention basin, as well as maintain some of the existing vegetation and kind of aesthetic benefits of the current landscape design. So based on all of that, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission accept the analysis and findings identified in the initial study and approve the mitigated negative declaration, and accept the required findings and approve the use permit and design review for the proposed St. Helena Custom Crush project at 420 La Fada Street in southeast St. Helena. I'm available for any questions. As I mentioned, I believe the applicant has a presentation that they would like to make.
Before we do anything, I need to disclose that I spoke to 2 members of the public, one person who lives on Dowdell Lane and one person who lives on Mills, and simply was neither of them had any concerns, but I wanted to disclose.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I should add to that. The only comment that was received during the 30-day comment period was a letter from Caltrans. Staff has provided a response to that with some help from the traffic engineer, and that is on the desk of the commission to review.
I have a staff question. May I?
Go ahead.
Director Hausch, can you point me to the water study? That I don't. I'm having... Perhaps
as mentioned, it's not in our packet. I sent an email out identifying that the appendices to the mitigated neg deck had been provided previously with the CEQA document, so it was not reprinted.
Okay.
However, I can talk about it a little bit, and I'm sure the applicant can as well, but it did propose kind of a variety of meeting the criteria of the water neutrality ordinance. There's some, I think, questions as to which tenants are currently going to stay in the building and which are going to relocate. There's two options. And so the applicant is identifying that if two tenants relocate, then they would have enough water savings to not require any retrofits. If only one of those tenants were to relocate, I believe they would have to retrofit the equivalent of two single-family homes at a location within the city. And it's worth noting that it did propose another alternative that staff is not supportive of, and it would require city council approval, and that was essentially payment of fees, I think, and the applicants can add to this.
And I will disclose that I've had a conversation with Ms. Olsford. I've also corresponded with her via email. I would also like to say that I have asked Director Hausch that we hear this in two sessions, because I don't feel that this was published enough for the public to understand what was going on. And in view of some of the things that have happened recently, I think that we need to get this out to the public. Jesse, if you could get it in the paper, I'm going to ask that we do this because I think that the public should have the opportunity to see this. And when I looked at it, there were 2 days left from the 25th of September, and I know you gave it to us earlier, but I don't think anybody else has seen it. Somebody told me that when they saw on our list the crush, they thought it was the exercise room over there, and therefore I really believe that we need to get this out to the public and let them make comments on it. So I think we should hear any testimony tonight, but I would like to continue it till I believe it's the 5th of December. That's our next meeting.
Oh, I thought it was the 20. You said in the letter the 27th, which should have been the 20th.
No, we canceled that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so the second meeting of the Planning Commission is canceled.
Oh,
however, we would ask, if the Planning Commission chooses to continue this, which we should hear from the applicants, but we would ask that the comment period end at a minimum on the 25th to allow us to then have some time to put together a response to those comments.
And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I just feel it needs to get out to the public.
I would like to, though, make it clear that when the second hearing happens on the 5th of December, that public comment will be taken on that night as well as tonight. As long, because that has come up in the past where there was a question as to whether it should be. So I don't know how. I don't know who decides that, or if I should be looking at you or looking at us, but I really think that's important that the public be able to make comments at the second hearing as well as this one. So does anyone know the protocol?
Let's address that after we hear from the applicants and the public.
Chair, are we asking questions of staff now?
Sure.
Sure.
I just wanted to disclose what
I have
had
a bunch.
I've got several. The fence restriction. I'm looking 1760-070-F1. Where's the front of the building? Are there two fronts of the building, or do we only have one front of the building?
So, according to the zoning code, the front is a narrower portion of the lot with street frontage.
Okay, well, the fencing requirement appears to read, no fence in the front setback. So, if the front setback's on the La Fata side, or on the Dowdell side, that will make somewhat of a difference. Mm-hmm. So, I would suggest we need to know which side is the front of the building to start with, if we're going to talk about this issue. And I'm guessing you're saying it's the La Fata side then.
Based on the definition of the front of a lot in the zoning code, which does also state that the planning commission or the director can make an alternative determination should they find certain situations.
So either side can be front, but it can only be one side.
That's correct.
Okay, so we need to decide, I think, if we're going to proceed on the discussion about the retention pond, we need to know which side's the front. Because the non-front side doesn't fall under the 3-foot prohibition within the 20 feet. You could have it 5 foot tall within the 20 feet. Second thing, this parcel does abut an agriculturally zoned area, correct?
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. If you read on F2, it calls for an opaque 8-foot tall landscaped fence or wall is required where I district development adjoins non-I district, which fence or wall need not be on the property boundary. So it seems to me under our zoning code, it calls for an 8-foot fence on the Mills Lane side of this property.
I would say the Mills Lane side isn't agriculturally designated. It would be the northeastern side where Crocker Star is the agriculturally designated parcel.
Correct. So it seems that we need an 8-foot fence there. Is that reading correct?
That's
the zoning code.
So the zoning code does identify that as a standard. However, the building was built and there's no proposal to reconstruct anything in that area. So the commission could make that interpretation, but I believe they could also say that the current building was developed under the previous standards and identify that it is.
I may have missed that. I didn't see it in the staff report, so I assume this is a discussion the commission will need to have as well.
Staff did not identify that as, because of the existing developed site, staff did not identify that as a element or a requirement and is not conditioned.
And I didn't measure off the landscape buffer, but it calls for a minimum 15-foot landscape buffer,
All areas that are being touched,
including where the parking is?
all landscape
Okay.
areas that are being re-landscaped
Okay.
are 15 feet.
Okay.
And I scaled the detention basin, and it is 15 feet from the back of the street. I believe the existing landscape areas may not quite be 15 feet, but they are close. And again, those were developed under the previous standards. Staff was looking at this as an addition to an existing developed site and was not looking at it under the lens of a complete redevelopment.
Okay. Under 1760, Dickens is a number. 06, no, not 06. 070H5. Off-street parking may not be in the front yard, but may be anywhere else provided it is not in conflict with subsections C or G of this section. So it looks like if the front is the façade, it says there shouldn't be any parking there.
But the front is Dowdell,
If the front
based
is
on the zoning code
Okay.
designation, and the only new parking spaces that are proposed on Dowdell are not within that front yard.
Okay.
But that yard would be a 20-foot setback, and a majority of the site is not, the parking is not within the
Okay.
20 feet.
Once again, I didn't scale it off. And it seems to me that 1760080 is in the wrong place. I don't know if it's an error in the printing or an error in the location of it. It talks about the Central Business District wastewater use.
Welcome to our zoning code.
Okay. That shouldn't be an I there. This is just a flat-out error. It's in the wrong place. Okay. Yes, I did read it, Lester.
Oh, yes. You have questions too? I have some questions. Shall I go?
David?
On page 2 of the theoretical water use report, it says that due to possible changes in the tenants at OK Tire Store and Britain Tree Services, a water-neutral feasibility analysis will be presented instead of a direct comparison between the existing and proposed water usage. It's my understanding that state law says that the analysis has to be based on the actual water use of the last 2 years, the previous 2 years of when the application is. And I kind of looked into this in the past, and that's my understanding. I could be wrong. I'm wrong a lot, but
I would defer that question to the applicant's representative, but it's unclear to staff what state law would be involved in the calculation of the city's water neutrality ordinance.
all I know is that when the Davies Winery application came in, they did their analysis based on a business that had been there several years before. And so, I mean, that's where I'm coming from. It's just a question for you, and if it's inappropriate here, I'll ask the. Okay. The other, let's see. I was wondering if the studies, the geological studies, had taken into consideration the new activity in the West Napa Fault since the last earthquake. I assume it has, but I wanted to ask because there was quite a bit of action. The fault came several miles north of where it used to be, and I didn't know if that was taken in consideration.
So again, that's a question for the applicant. I will say that they'll be required to meet all building code requirements.
But I'm just wondering if that analysis was based on that. So, okay. Let's see. Where will the water that's going to be stored in the 10,000-gallon storage tanks come from? There are two 10,000-gallon storage tanks. I didn't understand where they were going to get water.
So I believe you're referencing the wastewater storage tanks that are identified as a part of the process,
okay.
But the site does propose to use its well for wine production water.
Okay, so that was another question, because it says that city water will be used for restrooms and potable consumption. So I was wondering so no city water will be used for wine production at all?
As identified by the applicant.
Okay, so all of the wine production water and the irrigation will be coming from the well?
I don't know how the existing irrigation is currently watered. Again, we can ask the applicant that question.
Okay, and I was wondering, does anyone know if the aquifer, anything about the aquifer in that area? Because I know there's the Redmond project, Star Winery, this project, and some individuals on the streets around there who are on well, and I just didn't know if this is going to be an extra use on the well.
So there was a well analysis included in the CEQA document, and it's included as part of the appendices.
I know, and what they mentioned was the flow, and the flow was adequate, but they didn't mention if anything was known about what was underneath. So you don't know, or who should I ask?
I'm not in a position to comment specifically on the aquifer levels.
Okay. Let's see. I'm sorry, I've got some
Can we
more.
find that out in the next week or two?
I can't guarantee it'll be found out in that amount of time. We might have some well data information, and I believe the county did a regional study which included our aquifer area, but I have not seen it, and I have not been privy to it.
I heard they had done it. Yeah.
Well,
there's extensive information available from the county, which has been analyzing the Napa Valley Basin from one end to the other. The monitoring wells are not evenly distributed throughout the area, but the latest report's rather comprehensive.
Yeah, 5.9b on page 49 of the negative mitigated declaration says the city has adequate water supply resources to accommodate development of the proposed project without depleting, degrading, or altering groundwater supplies or interfering substantially with groundwater recharge. So I just wondered what that was based on, what that statement was based on, and you're suggesting that there's a lot of research that it might be based on. So I just wanted to know.
The secret consultant is here, and she can probably elaborate a little bit.
Good. Okay, let's see if I had more questions. Okay, transmission. I can ask I guess I'll ask the applicant. It was about the studies on transportation and circulation. I guess I can, maybe you know. Did they reflect on pages 64 to 70, did they take into consideration the cumulative effects of already approved Friedrichs Hotel and the proposed Hall Hotel?
Yes.
They did? Okay, thank you for that. And I think, okay. Thank you.
Lester?
I'll have questions for the applicant, but not for staff.
Grace, are we going to talk about the environmental document as a separate item as well? Because I have some questions on the environmental document. Are we going to wait for the
staff,
consultant?
Or you want to talk to
There may be more consultant questions than staff
I
questions.
think we should hear the consultant before we ask any more.
Okay.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Donna Oldford. I'm a planning consultant from St. Helena. I'm here tonight representing St. Helena Custom Crush Facility. in our industrial park on the southeast side of town. There are a number of people here. Our client, Nat Comas, is here, and he will introduce himself to you later. We have Andy Simpson from Delta Engineering, our civil. Tom Faraday from Valley Architects is the architect. We have Peter Gallagher here from Omni Means. He was the transportation consultant. Let's see, am I leaving anyone out? And we have our CEQA consultant, who's the city's consultant, of course. We do have a letter of support that I sent to Noah earlier today. You have that. So it was a letter of support from Tom Redmond, one of the neighbor across the road. We did meet with the neighbors in the area about the project, and I was speaking with some of them as recently as yesterday and today. The Comas family members met with Mr. Stanton and also Pam Starr and Mr. Crocker of Crocker and Starr Winery. That was actually before my time on this project, but I can tell you that as a result of some of that feedback, this project was almost completely redesigned so that the operations of the custom crush facility would occur further away from Crocker and Starr Winery rather than closer to. I want to commend the staff on working with us diligently on resolving any potential issues related to the project, and I hope we're there tonight, and also in doing a very thorough staff report. We were greatly appreciative of that. Noah has given you an excellent staff report. Our presentation won't duplicate that tonight, but we are here to answer any questions that you might have. I want to say I think this is really an ideal use for this location as a custom crush facility increasingly in demand in the valley. It's very difficult to find suitable locations for these facilities, and they do have certain requirements. An industrial park near a major arterial is actually the ideal the location for what I like to refer to as the workhorses of an agricultural area. This particular use is not, this is not an altogether new project. This was pointed out to you. It represents an expansion of an existing project, a wine warehouse, a viticulture-related facility that was first permitted in 1983. The Comas family does serve as a landlord to other uses that have occupied this space for some time now. It does meet all the general plan goals. It is consistent entirely with your zoning code provisions. As Noah mentioned, there are no tours and tastings or marketing events with this facility. Your zoning precludes that. The reason for that, one person asked me, why is that? And it's an industrial area. Traditionally, you want to avoid commercialization of your industrial base. It's typically limited, especially in a small area such as ours, and the commercialization of that ends up translating too easily into highest and best use, becoming something other than industrial, a use that chances are you can't replace. And so we're not proposing any visitation or marketing. I will say that with more and more corporate uses and ownership coming into the valley, what we're seeing is that we're looking at repurposing of many of these types of facilities to provide this very much in demand use. In this case, it's kind of a one-stop shop where they can small labels, smaller wine interests can bring their product, they can crush it, ferment it, and barrel age it here in this facility. This particular client has made significant capital improvements and cash outlays here. They, sometime back, had provided money to the county for a left turn lane, which has subsequently been provided with our channelization, the continuous left turn lane improvement on Highway 29. And the same with infrastructure for this area as the development was occurring in the industrial park. I won't speak for the CEQA consultant. She's here tonight. Thank you for doing a timely job and a very thorough job on this document. As you note from the CEQA document, there are no significant impacts identified. We do have some mitigation measures that the applicant has agreed to as part of the project description, so they do not rise to the level of significant impacts. There was a question about cumulative impacts. Just as a reminder, CEQA defines cumulative impacts as any time when there are as many as two potentially significant impacts for which there is no mitigation that's possible. We do not have that situation here. We do not have cumulative impacts with this project. In our discussion with neighbors, we had a question about the use of the alley. The use of the alley will not change. We're not talking about vehicle traffic through there. If there was a fire engine would access that side of the building because it is 15 feet wide. But otherwise, we don't envision any change in that. I know the Cochran Star Winery expressed some concern about noise at times when they were doing their tours and tastings. And so what we're suggesting is that the owner, this is something that can be resolved through communication between the partners, and we're proposing that we provide them with a name and a cell phone contact so that they can call and anytime there might be a problem, and that would be resolved very quickly. The retention basin, I will defer to our architect and more specifically our civil engineer on that. That is an existing use on the property. As you can see, it is required. There is some expansion proposed to handle the wastewater from the process winemaking. It is an industrial park. This is not the entry to the park. We're not providing an entry statement, and this is a location that is not visible from Highway 29 either, or from other public roads. Traffic, we have Peter here to answer specific questions that you might have. It is primarily seasonal, and of course having no visitation and no marketing events means that there's quite a bit less traffic than there might be otherwise. Nuisance factors such as odor, we are not proposing any perishables be placed in the garbage receptacles that are in the alleyway. That is strictly for recyclable material. The recyclables associated with the custom crush facility will be located at the far end of the project, close to where the operations are. The one in the alley will continue to serve the existing uses. So with that, I think I would just like to, if perhaps you have questions for me. If not, I'll ask Nat Comas to introduce himself and tell you a little something about himself and his family and their ownership of this building. And as I said, we have everybody here for answering your questions. I will request that if we have public testimony, we'd like a chance for rebuttal to answer questions or perhaps to correct something for purposes of the record. But we'll reserve that till such time. Of course, we would like to finish tonight if at all possible, because we have had several delays on this for various reasons. We don't appear, to our knowledge, we don't have opponents, and the use is so consistent with general plan. It's not a new project. So I would just respectfully request that if your questions have been answered and you're satisfied this evening, that we would love to finish tonight. You have the letter, Noah, so I don't need to enter this. Okay. I'll give you this. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you tonight. Does anybody have a question for me?
I do. I was wondering, you mentioned one thing, but why, what were the reasons that Mr. Starr and Mr. Redmond gave for wanting the facility not close to where they are, and then that changed your design to be in a different place? You mentioned some of the noise. I was wondering what some of the other reasons might have been.
Well, Mr. Redmond had no problems with how it was designed originally.
Okay.
He is directly across the street on Dowdell Lane. This was before my time, and perhaps Tom can speak to that more. It's my understanding, though, that when the Comas family first spoke with Pam Starr and Mr. Crocker, that they had some concerns about the operations, the crush and the fermentation area, the processing area, being located closer to them rather than further away, because they needed some. They're a small family winery, as you know, and they wanted to have noise control to the extent that was possible, and that's my understanding. Other than that, I'm not aware there were any.
I can speak to that a little bit. The original design, when the application was first made, located the winery production area directly adjacent to the Crocker Star tasting room. So on the north, what would be, if this was on the northeast corner of the property, basically where the Britain Tire Shop or Britain Tree Service is currently.
Southeast, I think.
It is southeast in reality, but I was just using this graphic, but that's exactly right, the southeast corner. And so the applicant, after receiving the issues letter, completely redesigned the project in response to that concern and some other concerns.
So the noise. Do you know what other concerns there were besides noise?
Well, that is the only concern that was voiced to me from the adjacent property owner. Staff had identified a number of concerns, as is typical of our first review.
Okay.
But and after the redesign, no one has ever contacted staff voicing any concerns over the project.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions as well, Donna. Does this project contemplate the use of a mobile bottling line then? I've heard reference to fermentation and storage, barrel aging, but not bottling.
It does not include a bottling line. It would be a mobile bottling truck.
And where would the mobile bottling occur then?
You would have, the mobile bottling would occur back. Okay, you want to do that in your design review?
I missed that going over the plans then. Okay, well, when the architect presents, then we can cover that. And then, and I don't know if you would know this, Donna, but I'm also wondering what the calculated barrel storage capacity is. I saw the area for barrel storage. I see a tank layout, but I'm not sure what's been designed in terms of barrel storage. So that was my other question.
Okay, that would be, I will ask Tom to speak to that.
Very good.
That would have been part of the assumptions for the design of the facility, and that the amount of space required for barrel storage. He's going to cover a number of these issues when he speaks to the design and design review. Anything else?
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. And so I'd like to introduce Nat Comas, and then we'll ask, after that, we'll ask Tom to do a brief presentation that speaks to the design review, and then Andy Simpson and Peter Gallagher are here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nat Comas, and I'm a resident here, St. Helena, 2647 Columbard Court. Basically, I'm here tonight to hopefully get this this project going. It's been about 2 years now that we've been planning it. I think you can hopefully read that we've been very sensitive to the neighbors and also worked with them. Anyways, I think this is just a further continuation of this business. Actually, we're seeing a lot of the storage facility kind of decrease as more and more corporations are acquiring the smaller wineries. So we are actually we're kind of short of space for the first time in about 5 years. Usually the warehouse is constantly packed. We have waiting lists, but that hasn't been the case in the last 2 years. And so this is where this has kind of, we see this as helping the business thrive and also providing a service for the community. With that, I don't really, probably couldn't answer most of your questions, so I can really kind of just turn it over to Tom so we can keep the show on the road here. A lot of people are waiting, so, but thank you.
Is it pointer? Okay. Good evening. My name is Tom Faraday. I'm an architect practicing in St. Helena. My my business address is 1560 Railroad Avenue. Give you a little background. As Noah mentioned, the original project was going to be on the eastern side of the existing building, and when the Comas family met with the neighbors, we decided that it was much smarter to put it on the western side of the building. If we could go to the site plan for a minute, no? Or the aerial photo, actually. I don't have a pointer, but you can see where the building was originally going to be in the southeast corner, and we moved it to the northwest corner. There's a kind of a circle of landscaping there, and that's where the existing stormwater retention pond is. The new pond will be in the southwest corner, where there's also kind of a circle of landscaping. Most of that landscaping will be either retained or replaced. The large trees along Dowdell will remain there. There was a mention of parking. As you can see, there's a great deal of parking around the building and has been there for 30 years probably. We're not changing that really much, except that we will be building our building about where that red arrow is. Question of bottling came up. There is a covered area. Maybe we should go to the floor plan. I wish I had a pointer, but in the lower left of this drawing there, just to the right side of that lovely red rectangle, is sort of a covered porch for a bottling truck to back into, and then it will exit onto La Fata. The building is designed to be more or less a shed to cover the stainless steel fermenting tanks. As was mentioned, the barrel aging will occur inside the existing warehouse. Someone asked about the number of barrels. I think if you take 120,000 gallons divided by 60, you got about 20,000 barrels, and that would, was it 2,000? Okay, my bad. In any event, we've got a huge warehouse there, and we can accommodate any number of barrels, I would say. I think we never actually laid them out, but as you know, you can stack barrels 4 high, and I'm sure there's plenty of room there. The temperature control, Lester, will be by probably a plastic curtain within the existing warehouse, so that the barrel area can be conditioned lower than the rest of the warehouse. As I say, it's more or less a shed. It's got an interesting roof line with a cupola. We tried to make it look like a barn, if you will. There are large openings on the Lafada Street side to allow grapes and equipment to move in and out. Our plan is to cover those openings for security with the kind of rolling screen that you would see in a mall, for instance, when you close down the business at night. So it would cover the openings, and yet you could see through the screen these beautiful pieces of equipment, stainless steel crusher, stemmer, press, and so on. So people could see what's in there, but you couldn't get in. It's pretty simple. I'm not sure what else to tell you about it. The bioretention facility that's mentioned in the report is entirely underground. From the ground, it will look like a landscaped area because rainwater will go into it, and it's more or less filtered there, and then it goes to this pond. And I'll point out that the pond will be dry the majority of the year. Only in the rainy season will there be water in it. The rest of the time it will look like a landscaped area. There'll be grasses and I'm thinking large cobbles or gravel, big pieces of rock on the surface of the pond. And in the event of a big storm where water will fill it, it will either percolate down into the ground, or in a huge event like a 10-year, 100-year storm, it'll spill over onto Dowdell. So that's the purpose of that retention pond. Point out that there's an existing pond there. Nobody ever really notices it. It is landscaped around it. It has a fence with stuff growing on it. We're simply moving it. It's not like it's a new feature of the site. I think our landscape architect has done a good job in that rendering, showing you the fence and the plants and trees that will be around it. What else? Any questions? The height of the existing fence, I'd guess it's 5 feet, Nat? I'm pretty sure it's at least 5 feet.
It's taller than that, Tom.
It's a wire fence.
It's taller than that.
Is it taller than 5?
Yeah, I was over there the other day.
Ah.
It's taller than I am, and I'm a little over 5 feet, so.
Yeah, the drawing doesn't look like a 5-foot fence, but hey.
That's supposed to be a 5-foot fence.
Well, it's coming up to the bottom, it just covers the hood of what looks to be a Mercedes SUV shown in the parking lot. So I don't think that's 5 feet.
You think it's more or less?
I think it's less.
Less. Well, it has to be 3 in the front.
Mercedes SUV is 5 foot up.
I have no idea. I don't have a Mercedes.
That's not his forte.
I think that's a 3 foot. That's a 3 foot
fence is further away than
That's right.
Then it appears right there.
I believe it's drawn to scale. I didn't draw it, but I believe it's to scale.
So that's the 3 foot fence.
No, that's a 5-foot fence. Doesn't it say 5 feet on it?
Yes. 5 feet.
Yeah.
The plans identify as 5 feet, and it is scaled.
And it's 3 feet in the front, correct? The fence is 3 feet. No,
No, it's
the
5 feet all around the
Okay.
pond.
Got
For safety.
The drawing would be a plain flat angle, but okay.
So if you have no questions, I'll sit down.
I do have a question. It's just more about the existing structure and the connection to the new structure. So the new structure is a barn-like structure, and yet it essentially attaches to the existing warehouse, which also has some cupolas and some crenellations or whatnot.
It has some dormers.
Yeah. And so what...
And it's a tilt-up building, a concrete building.
Right. I'm just curious, is it intended to have any relationship to the primary warehouse, or is it sort of tends to sort of float out in front? I mean,
The intent is to differentiate itself from the original building.
Okay.
I guess I have a question too, because it's mentioned, I'm confused, but it's mentioned that maybe Britain Tree Service and maybe Bigot will be there and maybe they won't. Gutenberg's and the exercise place will be. If Bigot and Britain leave, is that part of your plan, or what is that?
The idea is to meet the water neutrality provisions if, for example, Britain moves out, and I don't know how many employees they have, let's say it's 8 or 10, and then the crush facility comes into play, and they have 8 or 10 employees. The net difference in employees on the site would be the same. Therefore, no water retrofits would be required.
So is that planned to have that happen?
Well,
or
I don't personally know if Britain is moving out or when they're moving out. By the time this building comes into the city for a building permit, then hopefully that will be known and can be addressed.
But your plans adapt those areas to fit in with the rest of the...
There's existing office space in Britain's tree service that would be utilized by the custom crush facility.
Okay,
Following?
so you're right. So you wouldn't have to redo any, you wouldn't be redesigning those two areas.
No, that's
No.
not part of our
Okay,
plans at this
okay.
time.
All right. Thanks.
No, I have a photograph here. Is there a way to display it? It's regarding the board and bath siding. There's no pictures. The mention was about board and batt siding or metal siding. And what I wanted to point out is you can do board and batt siding out of wood or you can do it out of metal. And this picture, hopefully, will show you a local building with metal board and batt siding that we think looks pretty nice.
Is it textured to look like wood?
It's not textured per se. It's metal, but it's bent and shaped and put up.
It looks like board and batt.
It sure does. There it is. That's the building at the high school, St. Helena High School. That's metal siding, and it's
Right out here.
we call it board and batt because that's what it looks like, but that's actually metal, and it's what I was thinking for this winery, Custom Crush, because it's much more durable than wood. And let's face it, in an industrial area, it would be more practical. So I just wanted to share that with you. We can discuss it at length later.
Will it be red also?
Could be red, could be
Okay.
white.
Okay.
Have your choice of color.
And condition number 27 identifies that the siding material of the new addition is required to be board and batt as indicated on the project elevations. It does not speak to wood or metal.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm wondering, we've been at this about 2 hours. Do you think we could take a short break?
Let's take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
It's another.
Don, are you guys through, or? We are. Okay. Then I'm going to open public comment. That's all I know. Thank you.
Hi.
Public comment's open.
Yes. Lois Batuello, 1634 Main Street. I'd like to ask each of you commissioners to please take the materials I gave you home and give them some thoughtful consideration. On the analysis that I gave you, you will see a reference to a particular 6-page USGS folio that you can obtain, and that's where you see your statistical probabilities of an earthquake in the next 27 years now. At 98% chance of one or more 6.0 or greater quakes, and then you see 72% chance for one or more 6.7% quakes or greater.
Ms. Batuello, this public hearing is specific to this project.
And that's what I'm saying. According to the guidelines in seismically active areas, Special Publication 117A, Guidelines for Evaluating and Mitigating Seismic Hazards of California, 2008, your foundation isn't going to meet the guidelines in a liquefaction zone. So that's what I'm trying to just prepare you for. Okay, so I want to give you some references where you can look things up and additional references now. And it's not that I'm saying, I don't want to do the project, but I think you need to delay a decision at least until you can absorb this information and give the architect and other people, the Comas family and others, time to think about it, because it's a big financial investment too. Okay, and we're right on the cusp of getting Alquist-Priolo maps that more clearly define the problems that we have. Okay, so that's all my comment is, because it does directly impact the project. It's a big investment. And if it's just not quite there, and yet we have Alquist-Priolo down the pike, it's a fiasco on your hands. And I don't want to see the city liable either. Thank you.
Any more public comment?
Hello, Joel Gott, St. Helena. I think it's a great use for a business like this out in the industrial zone. You couldn't ask for a better use, in my opinion, to tie things back that will keep smaller grape growers here in town be able to custom crush their wines. And, as we have consolidation in the business, this opens it up to younger winemakers to be able to make small batch wines that then will theoretically grow. So I think it supports not only our town, but also supports ag and keeps smaller ag in town as well. Only thing I would urge you guys, just coming from the wine business, is the sooner these guys get approval, the closer they would be able to maybe even take in next harvest, which in our world means a lot. So it's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening to the Commission. My name is Gary Margadant. I live up on Mount Veeder Road. I'm here to speak about the project, but mainly the city's end of the project, which is the waste treatment plant. I think the project itself, like what Mr. Gott said, is a good reason. It's a nice facility. It's going to help a lot of people. It's going to change the variety of the ability of the locals to go ahead and actually make custom wines, and I think that's really wonderful. But what I'm concerned about is your waste treatment plant, which is currently under a citation from the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Board. You have to, I think it's a cease and desist order, to go ahead and replace that facility, one that will meet the changing standards, that it doesn't meet that right now. You're probably going to be putting in, and I think it's the discharge of the water, the quality of the water that goes into the river, and I don't think that really you want to turn that river into, an extension of a sewer. So I would say to you, if this facility is going to impact the custom crush facility is going to impact that facility such that, it's going to exacerbate the problem that you have right now, then I would say that, I would not hook this facility up to it until you have completed your repairs and the redesign of that facility down there to meet the standards of the state Water Board and the State Water Act, I think is what it is, the Clean Water Act from the federal government. I think that is something that's absolutely essential here. I don't want to see you get backed into a problem where you have to go ahead and supply capacity to this facility, and yet you haven't completed that project and in the waste treatment plant. I think it's good planning to go ahead and make sure that the project is well aware of that they shouldn't be hooked up until that time or used until that time. The project is doubling the amount of water that comes from wineries in your town. You currently have a capacity of, I think it's 26,000 gallons of wine in the city, and this is 120,000, so it's essentially doubling your capacity. And water is used by these wineries in a ratio of 7 to 1. There's about 7 gallons of water that is used for every gallon of wine that is made. And this doesn't come on a level field throughout the year. It comes during crush. That's mainly when you have this type of thing. When they do barrel cleaning and other things, sure, that spreads it out a bit. But I would caution you to make sure that your infrastructure and your facilities are working properly and that do not pollute the rivers, and make a contribution, a very good contribution to the health of the Napa Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comment? Closed public comment. I beg your pardon?
So the secret consultant is here, as is the traffic engineer, if there are any questions specific to them.
I have a question for the applicant, so whenever we're ready for that part of it.
The applicant like to rebut here? Or answer questions?
We'll refer them. Donna Oldford, planning consultant for the applicant. Would you like to ask questions first? I have just a few items.
Yeah, I have a few questions, and perhaps it's you or Mr. Comas. Always like to hear from that. I'm just curious. I would, my personal opinion, I don't know, from a planning commission perspective, is that sort of those small storefronts that are off Main Street are sort of a diminished resource in St. Helena, and I'd really prefer the project to be water neutral by retrofitting existing homes rather than sort of taking away from, whether the tree service or the tire store is still there or not. It'd be great that, unless it's completely uneconomic, it'd be great if those were still sort of available for that types of businesses, because I think there's less of that availability in town.
A question. Do you know if someone had mentioned to me, and I don't know if it's true, that any grapes that are crushed in the valley need to be 75% Napa Valley grapes? Do you know if that's the case, and if so, is that what will be required?
Well, actually, you're referring to the 75% grape source rule that's in the Napa County Winery Definition Ordinance. That does not apply in the city of St. Helena, only in the unincorporated area on ag zone lands. For instance, it doesn't apply in the county's airport industrial park.
Right, that was the one place.
But it does not apply in St. Helena. However, it is their plan that this would be Napa Valley grapes.
Okay, but there wouldn't be any
There was nothing that
requirement or
would
anything.
require a
Okay.
certain percentage of it.
I was told
No.
that it was, but all
No.
right, thank you.
There is not.
And can you describe, there are 24 tanks involved, so does that mean that 24 customers could come and do their custom crush, and then they would be fermenting in those tanks, and then that they couldn't have any more people come to do custom crush, or can people come to crush there and then take it home or someplace else to ferment? I'm not clear if there's a limit to how many crushes can happen each season, or how it works.
Well, the way this is analyzed is based on, just like any other winery, it's based on the maximum production level for this facility. It's 120,000 gallons a year. That is their maximum. So whether it's one or two entities or 20 entities, it's still 120,000 gallons.
But you could only have 20 if you want your wine fermenting in your own tank. You can only have 24. I see, but one person could use more tanks if they needed to.
Yeah,
if it were bigger. But could people come and use the crush facilities and then take the wine and take it back to their own place and ferment it there in their own barrels and store it in their own place?
Well, they could. The point of this facility, though, is that it does everything. It
Whole
does
thing, right.
the crush, the receiving, the crush, the fermentation, and the barrel.
But it could do the other, so it would be open to doing the other. Is that accurate?
Well, that would be part of what they do in general. Whether they decide to store all their wine there or not is...
No, I mean just doing for people to bring their grapes in, to just do the crushing process and then take what they made away.
That's not...
Oh, so
that's
that
not
isn't
right.
happening. Okay, I mean so it sounds like it's limited to the amount you can ferment on site, and that's 120,000 gallons altogether, and that people can still come and store things there. That's different. Your storage would still be happening, and it wouldn't be connected. Okay, thank you.
It really wouldn't work, Bobby, very well to crush and transport red grapes.
Okay, I didn't know.
Not any great distance. You can crush and press whites and truck juice. That's done all the time.
That's
Works
right.
pretty well.
One tank may get used twice during one.
There are all kinds of possibilities.
That's
and,
what I was wondering,
I
yeah.
don't think it. I don't think we're looking at a floor plan that controls how that floor space will ultimately be used. They may find different tank sizes work better. There are a lot of things that could change there. Ordinarily, I would expect the tank layout to evolve as the business evolves and the requirements of the customers evolve. But I do have a question just about how we're calculating capacity. Are we talking about 120,000 gallons when produced, or 120,000 gallons when bottled?
Well, the 120,000 gallons would apply to bottled product or barreled product.
Which?
Well, those are different.
Well, it would apply, I assume, to the amount of the crush itself.
And you have, anywhere from 5 to 10% fluctuation in volume depending on when you measure it. And the county has a fairly clear published methodology for calculating what a use permit allows. St. Helena is not really that deep into its experience regulating wineries by capacity, so I figured we probably are better off establishing some understanding now rather than discovering we don't agree later. So I'm really asking, what's the applicant intend by 120,000 gallons capacity? And then I want some assurance that relates to how the impacts are calculated. And as an example, if we're using 120,000 gallons to calculate deliveries of grapes, then it matters, what kind of production per ton we're using. It looks very different if you're running the number at the back end when the wine is bottled than it does coming right out of the press. And if the approval of this project ultimately is subject, or proposed approval, to any scrutiny, the issues are going to revolve around the impact analysis, the number of trucks, the number of deliveries, and that's a point at which it's in everyone's best interest to have the methodology, the metrics of the whole thing pretty clearly worked out.
And
that's the reason I bring it up. So again, from my perspective, that's a question for the applicant. When in this wine production process do we measure the 120,000 gallons?
We actually, the 120,000 gallons, as I understand, was an articulation of the number of cases. And we had, please refresh my memory, 50,000 cases, yeah.
And
so
that's what
we're
motivated.
talking about finished product.
And then, that goes to Mike. That's a number I understand. We're regulating 50,000 cases of finished product or its bulk equivalent.
Correct.
And then, now I know what we're dealing with. Thank you.
And that's what motivated my questions too. I perhaps wasn't clear enough. If people could be crushing and going away, that's a lot. It's more trucks, it's more noise, and so forth. And I didn't know if that was included in the analysis, but it sounds like it's not an issue. So
it's a good question. We deal with gallons per year in Napa County. Over in Sonoma County, it's cases. So,
Don?
Are there any more questions for me? Because I do have just a couple of.
For you, Donna, but I do have some questions on the environmental document I'd like to get to.
Okay. And we'll ask them to answer that. I assume you have some traffic questions. I'm willing
have
to
some
bet.
traffic questions, yes, particularly in Trip Gen.
Okay.
But we'll get to that when we get to that.
And the CEQA consultant is here. I wanted to make and I would like for the city planner to maybe comment on the matter of your status and circumstances with the wastewater treatment plant as per Mr. Markedan's questions. But I wanted to point out that we are on page 39 of your CEQA document. You will see the seismic issue spoken to, and we are entirely consistent, or must be, with the building code that provides suitable mitigation for that potential impact. So that is not something that would be, I don't think, appropriate for you to delay a decision on this project based on something that hasn't happened yet and we're not even aware of. So I'll let the CEQA consultant speak to that. Also, on the question of wood versus metal, the board and bat actually looks very convincing. It's much more durable, but also trending these days, I find, I do a lot of winery projects, as you know, and one thing I'm seeing more and more of is the trend is to get away from wood. Wood is the enemy when you're making wine, storing wine, fermenting wine, and it's really taxing our aesthetics in some cases. But I know with one of my projects on 588 Zinfandel Lane, which Daphne and Bart Arajo bought and turned into a absolutely stunning new winery. Their creative powers were very active in finding great aesthetics for eliminating wood from proximity to their winemaking experience. So anytime we can avoid wood, it seems like that's the direction we're going in. If there are no further questions for me, I know you want to hear from the CEQA consultant and also the traffic consultant, and I have no further matters relative to rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is Olivia Irving. She works for M Group, and the city contracts with them to provide support services. As you know, Ms. Bianco works for M Group, and then we also use M Group through our existing contract to perform specific CEQA documents as were needed.
I can answer any questions. I did hear some concerns raised about the West Napa fault, and as Donna pointed out, it is addressed on page 39 of the ISMND. As everyone is well aware, there is a high activity of earthquakes in the Bay Area, and the occurrence of the Napa quake in 2014 certainly is a change to the understanding, because prior to that it had not been active in about 11,000 years, but it does not change dramatically the level intensity that one would expect in this area from the other existing earthquake fault lines. There is forthcoming information from USGS regarding the limits of that, and it is expected that a modification will be made to the Alquias-Priolo line, but the limit of that is probably, from a fault surface rupture, is about 13 miles south of St. Helena. So we'll see when that data is published. The occurrence of it is stated in the ISMND, and again, the California Building Code does provide for protections against earthquakes and any secondary effects as well, such as liquefaction. And I'm glad to answer any other questions that the Commission may have.
Okay. I've read the environmental document, and on going through it, I found several locations where the text conflicted with itself. And, I had trouble deciding which one was the right one, starting on the first page, where it says, other public agencies' approval is required. Well, great. You listed several agencies there, but if you read the text on page 7, it says, there are no other public agency review or approval required. So, those are sort of sprinkled throughout the document. You have one location, you ignore Angwin Airport, it doesn't exist. On another location, you bring up Angwin Airport. So, I think the document needs to be read for consistency, is my first concern.
John, do you have all those? Do you have those?
I went through and marked them, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad to provide any clarification where there is any consistency. Obviously, when an inconsistency where you have an 80-page document, there's certainly a chance for that sort of thing to occur. It is certainly not the intent, but this is part of the public review process, and it is an opportunity to reconcile any of those inconsistencies. So I'm glad to go by those point by point if you would like.
On page 28, you seem to have picked up the one-stop shop argument, and listed that as it supports goals of the CAP, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any data to back that up, or is that an a priori set of reasoning? Just because you believe it would be better. Is there any data extant to back up that statement?
Well, in regards to air quality screening and the criteria under which a threshold is determined, the data is very clear about what the thresholds are upon which
I'm asking about the one-stop shop supporting the CAP. Do you have any data that supports that statement?
You're talking about the fact that the winery is saying that they do all elements? I don't understand what you mean.
It's literally saying that, since A, the project supports the goals of the CAP in that it would create a one-stop shop for local vintners to crush, ferment, bottle, and store wines. Do you have any data to back up that statement?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what that data would look like. I think that statement there really comes from an understanding that agricultural supporting businesses serving ag in that immediate vicinity, there's a direct correlation between a reduction in vehicle miles traveled, and so that is where that statement is born from, is an understanding.
It is an a priori without any backup.
I would just add, are you saying, when you say cap, are you meaning climate action plan, or are you meaning a cap on the production?
No, I'm reading directly from the document.
I don't have it in front of me, that's why I'm
and I would
asking
think
for
it would be
clarification.
climate action plan, the Bay Area Air Quality Management Plan.
So then I imagine that it would be the traffic analysis that would support that.
It's just an environmental document is supposed to lay out the facts. And I see that kind of bald statement without anything to back it up. It leads one to question the document.
So as I mentioned, I think the traffic study is what would support that analysis.
A traffic study that looked at, does this indeed generate fewer trips? So that's what I'd like to see. If you're making a statement that a one-stop shop generates fewer trips, I'd like to see the study that backs that up.
There isn't going to be one.
Nonetheless, then the argument is, Lester, that shouldn't be in the document because it's an unproven statement.
I don't think it really works that way, John. The reality is that all environmental analyses have to begin accepting a project description, which anticipates realization of a business model that may or may not develop in the way that's proposed, but there's no other place for the analysis to start.
And I would just add to that
as an example, and the traffic engineer is, at the end of the day, dependent on description of the project that comes from the applicant.
And I don't mind any of that.
Then the
fine.
applicant says, well, I think all my growers are going to be within a 10-mile radius of the winery. No one has anything else to work with. It may or may not turn out that way, and it's already clear that that element of the project is unregulated. So there isn't anything to do but make a plausible assumption.
And I think
no one has anything else they can do.
Well, I would say no on two counts. One, this is marketing that it's a one-stop shop, that it reduces trips by having this all at a single location. That you can find out. So no
one has analyzed the behavior of wine producers who don't own their own facility. That analysis doesn't exist.
The thing that got me going was a marketing statement in an environmental document. It's a marketing statement. Sure it is. It's even in quotes, Donna. It's a marketing statement.
I understand your irritation with the phrasing, but I'm in the same place in terms of the significance of it. The consultants who are doing the analysis are dependent on the applicant to describe the project.
But they're not required to use the applicant's phrasing.
Well, that may or may not turn out to be a good idea, depending on the circumstances. It hasn't worked very well for you, but I don't think that tells us anything about whether or not the analysis is sound and appropriate. That's my point.
Okay. Page 44. We have recently had some wildfires that no one expected them to get as bad as they got, or burn as much as they did, or destroy so much territory inside what one would think would be a safe part of significantly larger communities than our own. And we were heavily threatened. Somehow I would think the wildland fires box shouldn't be checked as simply no impact and blithely move on. And that's just experience that we all went through recently.
I agree. I mean, just so we're all clear, this document was published September 25th, which predated the wildfire occurrence. I think if I was writing this today, I would not check the no impact box, absolutely, and there would be an explanation about the recent event. But the overall conclusion of less than significant from a project such as this would remain, even in light of those recent events, just due to the nature of the project.
Okay. Under C on the same hazardous materials checkoff list, it is close enough to a school to qualify. Are you saying the laboratory at that location has no strong acids, no strong bases, no poisonous indicators, nothing that one would expect to find in a laboratory?
No, not at all. I'm saying that the exposure risk because of this type of facility, it would not have an impact because state and local regulations require such prudent actions be taken to protect those
I'm reading
measures.
it says, or handle hazardous or acutely hazardous materials. Not just that it has emissions, but it handles hazardous. I would agree it's a fairly low risk, but nonetheless, I would think the lab would have hazardous materials in it. They are handling them. They are using them. Maybe no impact is a bit of a stretch. On page 46, you don't mention Angwin Airport. We're back to that. But further on you do.
John, is Angwin Airport, is it significant potentially in this?
They're listing, it's a listing of all airports in the area, and it doesn't list Angwin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
On either speak to the mic, please, or refrain from commenting.
So it may be an omission in one location, but it seems like the
It's
impacts
another one of those things that's
are probably not substantial.
No, but it's one of those things that's shown one place and not the other.
Okay.
If you read the document, you begin to question those kinds of errors just because they're there.
I'd like to chime in here. I have serious concerns over the fact that the CEQA consultant quoting is identified as quoting the applicant is causing concern over the quality of the environmental document. Getting to the point that Commissioner Hardy made, we're reliant on the applicant to provide us their information in order to analyze the project. And so the fact that that's done is not any reason, from my professional opinion, to question the quality of the analysis that's in that document. And I just need to make that point. And I'd like to further add that the CEQA consultant has to make a determination as to when it's most appropriate to reference certain factors like the Angwin Airport and when not to. And I don't have the document in front of me. But their professional opinion as to when to do that is theirs to make. And we welcome comments from the Planning Commission, individual commissioners, regarding their opinion as to when it should be. But please do not question the integrity or the quality of the analysis in the document based on those decisions, especially given we haven't heard them up until this point.
It's simply a matter of consistency.
Before you move on the airport issue, I want to make a comment about content. And I appreciate your concerns about consistency. When we evaluate airports in context with land use decisions, we evaluate airports that have a specified proximity to the project. In the County Airport Land Use Commission, for instance, they will, in those documents, they will often reference an airport that is relatively close by, but they don't necessarily do an airport compatibility analysis if the project is not located within the specified proximity. This project is so far away from Parrott Field up in Angwin that would not be appropriate. So I just...
But you do list the county airport.
Well, it's not close enough to that either. It's not a land use analysis
I recognize that,
point.
Donna,
So
but
that's how it's
if
determined.
you include it in the discussion at one point talking about airports, you should include it in another point where you're talking about airports. It's simply a matter of consistency, particularly since you include it in one spot and not in the other.
Well, I would suggest that neither one of them is appropriate because there's no analysis. Neither one of them is close enough. You're simply identifying the existence of the airport. Neither one is close enough to involve land use conflict issues. And I want the traffic engineer to speak to the issue of a one-stop shop concept being appropriate for consolidating trips. The assumption is obviously the less moving around you have of different winemaking functions and the more consolidated you have these facilities like a custom crush. This is why you want them near a major arterial. They're centralized, and they also translate into less of a necessity of moving wine around. When you're making wine at a winery, you have people going up and down the road moving wine out of the winery into wine storage. So this helps consolidate those trips. But I'll leave that to the traffic engineer, and I think the environmental consultant was picking up on that by way of assumption based on the type of project we're proposing. Thank you.
Under page 69, congestion management plan, Napa County does not have a congestion management plan. It does not have a congestion management agency. Doesn't fall under that piece of statute. They opted out years ago. So you might want to consider changing that wording such that one recognizes that we don't have one, aren't required to write one, don't even have the agency that writes one, literally. This is more of the traffic engineer question, but on page 63 and 64, for this reason, it is likely that calculated vehicle delays at the project study intersections along SR 29 may be longer than calculated. So that implies to me that the queuing at these intersections is the key controlling factor, not necessarily the HCM calculated LOS.
Yes, Commissioners, my name's Peter Galloway. I'm with OmniMeans, GHD. We did the transportation analysis. Commissioner Pont, yes. I think one of the points we make, particularly in this area of State Route 29, is that you have queuing factors on State Route 29 being caused by signalization within the city of St. Helena, which tends to back traffic up depending on the directional flow of the commute. So, for instance, in the morning, the northbound direction tends to queue up from the signal at Grayson, and that slows the flow of traffic through Dowdell Lane and through Mills Lane. And so we can only count as many vehicles as we can during that time, even though it's the peak commute period. So in a perfect world, it would just be free-flowing traffic, and we'd be out there counting it, and we would get a very sort of true sense of the level of service working there. But what's happening is the traffic volumes are slowing down in this area because of entering or leaving the town of St. Helena and encountering these signals. And so we tend to count not as many cars on State Route 29. So that's what's happening. So we may be getting a slightly better level of service.
Well, I think maybe you're also getting slightly better service because this is St. Helena. If you go out there and check, a lot of times people are waved through. Go ahead, make a left turn. Go ahead, make a right turn. Go ahead, come in. And the HCM doesn't assume anything like that when you do your calculations. So that also artificially raises your level of service at that particular intersection.
Very good point. In other words, when I just driving up here tonight, there's two things that's really working in the favor of Daldell Lane right now. It's the new signal at Grayson, which provides gaps in the traffic, which allows people at Daldell Lane to get out a little more efficiently because depending on the direction of flow, that flow is stopped at the signal so they can get out a little easier. And even bigger is the installation of the two-way left turn lane along State Route 29. That provides a tremendous amount of additional capacity for the LOS calculation. So you're exactly right.
I think all of us in this room have driven that section off and on when you literally couldn't move.
Right.
So the question circulates around is intersection LOS really what we should be doing, or should we be doing floating cars and looking at segment LOS, particularly in that section where you may wait 3 cycles to get through the light?
Right. No, I don't disagree, but we're using what we've been fairly much instructed to use. I will tell you the irony, and you all know this, is that when traffic slows down on 29 to essentially a crawl where they're stopped and you're at the minor street, people will basically let you out, and it's actually almost easier to get out than if the traffic was flowing at a higher rate.
Which makes your LOS look better.
Exactly.
And you're also getting a low traffic count through that intersection because it's clogged not only south of that intersection, but often north of that intersection as well. So your volumes look better. Your LOS, that intersection calculates better.
Yes.
But your speed through that intersection may be 2 or 3 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm suggesting that at least I realize this is a low traffic generating project.
Right.
It's not 100 houses. It's not,
Right.
So its addition, regardless of how you calculate it, will be pretty small.
Exactly.
The thing is here, our calculation method yields a result that doesn't ground truth, is the point.
Well, I would agree with that to just a degree, I think. I mean, we do acknowledge in the study that traffic is queued up. We are essentially not counting as many free flow cars as we could, and we're probably getting a little bit better level of service. And I think that's happening pretty much throughout the St. Helena area.
Right. But I think if you did floating cars through that segment, your calculation, your level of service calculation would be significantly lower than C. It would be D.
Sure
it would be F.
I'm sure it would. Yeah.
And so we're saying we're marketing this as a C location when it's actually an F location, and for me that's problematical.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly as more projects come along and become apparent, and every time you do this calculation under these conditions. Every time you do that calculation, no matter what you add to it, they're going to come out the same because the restriction isn't at the intersection per se.
Right.
It's because the traffic volume on the roadway exceeds the capacity of the segment, period.
Right.
I have a related question, Peter, but...
Could I just address a couple of points relating to the capacity in terms of what this project's adding? Or someone brought up a very good point that there's some existing businesses there on the site. I think it's the Britain Tree Service, and there's another office establishment. And in the study, we made no credit for those businesses in terms of them potentially moving out and not generating trips. In other words, we didn't do a net increase in project trips. We just added the project on top of their traffic. So it's likely that we're being very conservative in terms of the number of employment trips that are going to be added to Daldell Lane if the tree service and the other small office go away and relocate in some other area. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's neither here nor there.
And like I said, this is a small project in terms of of the trip it generates. So
Yeah.
your additions to what I think most of us would say is an already failed segment is minimal. And I'll grant you that right off the top. But because of the method of analysis used that you were required to use, I mean, the city's guidelines probably say HCM intersection, right?
Right.
And you use that. It doesn't result in level of service figures that are real. They're real for that intersection, but if you have to drive anywhere north or south of that intersection, that it's not a real number. It's not a real level of service.
No, and
it's a failed segment.
It's yes, and I say it's happening in many areas on State Route 29.
Yeah. Okay. My other questions do have to do with your trip generation.
Okay.
It was 4 regular employees, 4 employees at peak, right?
Yeah.
4 additional employees at
4
peak.
full-time employees
Yes.
and 8 part-time.
But you used 11. Why did you use 11?
Wait, I don't recall using 11 employees.
No, not trips.
That's what we're calculating for the peak hour. In other words, we've used the Napa County employment trip ratios to calculate the trips.
Okay.
So, in other words, for full-time employees, it's basically 3 one-way trips per employee. For part-time employees,
Right.
it's 1.9 or 2. So we calculate a daily trip generation, and then out of that, the Napa ratio for the peak hour during the weekday is 38%.
Okay, so once again, this was basically a calculation that was handed to you. Here, use this, more or less.
Well, we're being consistent with all of the winery studies that are being done in Napa County.
Right.
And unless we have very, very specific
And I don't think you
employment
would,
trip.
because that'd be speculative in this case, unless you had another project that was exactly the same size. Da 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 da. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Okay. So there will be no additional employees for marketing or sales.
None.
Okay. All the winemaker will be supplied by the company. There will be no additional trips caused by the owners of the grapes coming in, them hiring their own winemakers, et cetera, et cetera. There will be none of that.
That is my understanding. In other words, what is described to me is that there are currently very small wineries within the valley that during the crush season have to hire temporary employees, bring in bottling facilities and whatever, and do this on their site. When they're harvesting their grapes, now they can bring them to this site, and all of these employees and trucks and various assistants are not driving around the valley and creating more trips, so to speak.
Yeah, but if I bring my grapes, I'm going to use their winemaker. I'm not going to hire my own winemaker.
Well, that I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah,
once again, it's a de minimis number, but
right.
When you're working with so few trips.
Exactly.
Hello, Nat Comas. Let's see. So I guess the question, our understanding is you would be working with our winemaker, but
Okay.
that's, again, going back to the quote, the one-stop shop kind of thing. But maybe we shouldn't talk about that. But anyways, that was my understanding.
Okay.
But it could be otherwise. There's no restriction or anything.
It could be, but my understanding was you were going to be working with ours. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. We're still waiting to get approval, so we don't know what we're going to be doing here. Okay.
The other thing is,
we need to know things before you
he
get.
did a peak hour analysis, right? So you could easily make the argument that if somebody does have a winemaker they're bringing in to do this stuff, that winemaker won't be coming in on the peak hour or leaving on the peak hour. That'd be the easiest argument to make. That's the way I would make the argument if I were you.
Okay.
If there's concerns on the point of the commission, I would encourage them to provide direction to the applicant how they could modify their studies to address those concerns, or how they could provide direction to staff to where we could write conditions to address those concerns.
The main thing here, I mean, the trip generation was just, 8 employees, 11 trips. How does that work? But I think the main concern is the consistent use of HCM intersection level of services is not, and I think you would agree with me, is not providing a true picture of the function of the segment.
No, I would have to say no, but I would say that we are being consistent with all other analyses that have been done.
I'm not arguing about your analysis.
Okay.
I'm just looking to the future.
Exactly.
Right.
And that time's probably coming.
That's
our problem, not the applicant's problem.
True. But I want to make it clear, and having a traffic engineer, traffic planner. Hi.
Yeah.
Traffic planner to traffic planner.
John, I know.
That, standing there, it says, this doesn't give you a good picture of what's happening. You need to consider changing your analysis method. But for this particular case, he did what he was instructed to do. They did what they were told to do. They did it the way they did it, and I'm fine with it only because it's such a small number. I mean, if this was 100 houses, I'd have more trouble with that analysis, because that adds a lot of traffic.
Is there any way that the planning department, or that we could ask that traffic analysis be done on segment, on the segment, however whatever the language is, rather than what's being done? I mean, is that what you're maybe suggesting? That
I think that's something we need to look at in the future. City staff should really consider that as they move forward, particularly with a larger project, that the intersection level of service doesn't tell you what you need to know.
Do the segment.
It gives you a falsely rosy picture of how that's working. If you saw these, that's pretty good. B, that's great. A, that's excellent. You wouldn't go, the traffic out there is stop and go, but that's what it is.
Well, one of the other interesting things is CEQA analysis in general is going away from LOS, level of service at intersections, and shortly we'll be understanding the vehicle miles traveled, and so LOS will not be a significant threshold that's even analyzed in CEQA.
Be LOL.
VMT is coming.
So I do have a question, and this is really just more a matter of my desire to understand better what we can anticipate at the intersection. I got to start with staff. Now, if the Mills Lane Hotel project goes through, does that trigger the realignment of Mills at Grayson per the specific plan?
That's correct.
And then for Peter, with what I believe then is an additional signal element with the realignment of Mills and Grayson pursuant to the specific plan as a consequence of a project that's somewhere in the pipeline now. Does that change any of the analysis of how the intersection functions?
Well, what you would find is if Mills Lane is realigned and they install, it becomes the fourth leg of Grayson and it's signalized, obviously, it will attract trips from the east area specific plan in the Dowdell Lane area, because it'll be easier for them to get out on Highway 29.
So we'll have more trips at Mills. Trips will move from Dowdell to Mills. Things like that.
Particularly the trips that want to head south down 29.
Okay. Is that a good thing or a bad thing then?
You can't make a left turn off Mills.
Well, I would say it's a good thing.
Okay.
Kind of depends.
It's up
Breaks
to
it up.
you.
That's it. I mean, that answers my question.
Because you might get more pedestrians then.
You may, and
Which
would if they have their own pedestrian
Yeah.
phase, then
would mess up your
be great.
progression, and
Yep.
it could easily get worse rather than better.
It could. and
Or you
I've-
could have more bicycles and that would be
Hard to
better.
tell.
But I can tell you that pedestrians and bikes and transit are getting first priority now,
Yeah.
and so traffic is getting less and less of a priority in terms of efficiency. So it's very likely they would put in a pedestrian phase for folks, and that would slow it even more.
Yeah, we also have an aging population that isn't able to ride bicycles, and it's getting older and older and older. So that's going to change too.
She just sent have
The
them
other
walk
thing that
across the
happens with
highway.
that, Grace, is you have to change your pedestrian cycle. They usually figure walking is 4 feet a second, right?
Right.
And that's how long it takes you to get across the intersection.
Then who's walking,
They figure
John?
4 feet a second. Yes, but if you're walking with a cane or a walker, all of a sudden you're down to 2 feet a second, 1 feet a second. So the pedestrian cycle, we have to allow for that to get longer and longer and longer.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm wondering if I can ask, are you, John, are you finished? Because I had about 4 things I wanted
Sure.
to ask.
Like I
Is that
said,
okay?
I was getting the main concern that we need to change how we measure
Yeah.
what's going on out there.
Sounded, yeah, it's clear. I had a few things on noise, so that would not on traffic, and then I also wanted to clarify something with you, and I guess I'll just read them, and I'll have a suggestion, I suppose. But on the negative mitigated deck on page 54, 5.12. I feel that A, B, C, and D should all be potentially significant impact. And I'll say more about it. Again, on page 55, the noise impact discussion 5.12A and D, as in dog, truck traffic and winemaking noise will carry from this site through the air over the unobstructed valley floor to quiet residential neighborhoods along Charter Oak, Allison Street, McCorkle Avenue, Mariposa, Dowdell, and Mills, especially during evening, late night, and early morning hours. And there are no restrictions on hours of operation and or ambient noise for agriculture due to right to farm regulations. So this is a serious impact that I think needs to be addressed, and it certainly could be addressed by restricting hours. And I don't know if they would be willing to do that and not have any crushing after 10 p.m. or any activity after 10 p.m. I don't know if these people would be willing to do it, because I know on my block there is activity 24/7 during crush, and it can be very loud. Also. Page 56, there's no mention of the ambient noise from forklifts, including but not limited to the backup beepers, the moving and dumping of gondolas, and other winemaking activities. And I don't agree with the assessment again because of those. And in the staff report on page 100 of 414, numbers 2, 3, and 9, and 10 and 12, that the proposed use would not be injurious to public health, safety, or welfare is supported. This does not take into account the negative effects to public health and welfare of the noise pollution from this project, potentially, including forklift functional noise, gondola manipulation noise, truck engine noise, working and idling, voices, and other ambient noise generated by making wine. And obviously the Star Winery didn't want those facilities near theirs tasting room because it is noisy. So again, the mitigation could be against restricting the hours, because during crush is at 24/7. It mentions Monday through Saturday. That means no Sunday during crush, no hours. So I'm just putting that out as a real concern to me, and I have a lot of research and literature on the public health aspects of intrusive noise, especially when people are trying to sleep, especially when a lot of old people who have trouble, like myself, who have trouble sleeping. And I can tell you that the sound really travels, especially at night in that area. The other thing, so that was all I had. And the other thing, Noah, is this a time for me to ask for the language in this application that I had discussed with you at the break time? I mean, can I ask you to do that, or can you say something about that? Or?
And I'm trying to remember exactly what our conversation was, but you wanted
I wanted to make sure there was specific language in this application that prohibits I know that you have no plans to do it, but that prohibits the the change in terms of tasting and events without another use permit. And that needs to be, I would like to see that in this.
So currently, the application is conditioned that no tasting or events, tasting or tourist or visitation is permitted. So that's expressly prohibited in the current conditions of the use permit.
Correct.
We can completely amend that if the commission would like to add further supporting language. But that statement from the staff perspective in itself would require a use permit amendment should they propose that. And frankly, it's not even permitted in the industrial zoning
I
district.
know, it's not about the permit, though. It's about putting that language in here in such a way that if indeed that would come up, the Alcohol and Beverage Commission would be able to receive a complaint about the change. If it's not very specific, as it was not in another application that was here a few years ago that said there will be no tasting or events, and then when they changed their mind, they did a use permit, but you couldn't complain to the ABC because there wasn't certain language in the original application. That's what I'm trying to prevent here. Probably Donna knows exactly what I'm talking about, but I would really like that language to be in this application.
Donna Oldford, planning consultant for the applicant. There is a condition of approval that there shall be no tours and tastings. We haven't proposed it. More importantly, your zoning doesn't allow it. Your zoning already states, we don't have a problem if you decide to just put something else in there, but I'm always kind of reluctant to have that kind of statement when presented as a condition of approval when it's clear your zoning doesn't allow it.
It's clear in terms of the city, but it is not clear, but it is necessary in terms of the public being able to file a complaint with ABC if that language isn't in there. And I can find the exact language that's
okay, but
required.
ABC's not going to get involved with city ordinances. They don't.
They will get involved with, they do respond to complaints if the language is correct. I mean, I did a lot of research on this, so I would just like to cover that.
I've never seen that done, but I've never seen a ABC intervene on a local land use and zoning issue. They usually refuse to do it. But the point is, there's no tours and tastings. We're not planning it. We're not proposing it. You don't allow it. I think that kind of covers the waterfront, so to speak. I also, what was the other issue that came up? The hours of operation. The hours of operation are proposed as 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., except during crush. During crush, they have to be able to bring that fruit in when they bring it in, just like any winery in the county. It's an industrial park.
I understand.
I understand your concern with noise, but we also are required, we're mandated to operate according to the city's noise ordinance. We can't exceed your noise ordinance, but we can't have hours of operation limited during crush because that doesn't exist for any winery.
I hear what you're saying, and that means there's no way to mitigate it.
You got to do business, and fortunately, it's a very short period of the year, but this business can't operate under that kind of restriction.
That may be true, but that says to me that there's no way to mitigate it that I can think of.
Well, there's no need to mitigate it because there's no impact.
There is if you're sleep deprived for several weeks. Yes, there is. And there are other psychological and medical effects.
Okay, Donna, if I could ask something here. Yeah. If you were able to, say, pick up the building and move it 100 feet and drop it on the ground in the adjoining ag zone, you would be a winery instead of a winery use in an industrial tract. We'd be looking at it in a different part of the zoning code. And that part of the zoning code would basically say, hey, you're an agricultural use. You could go 724 if you want to. So, being if they, if they were in a different zone, which is right next door to them, doing the same thing they're doing where they are now.
You can do that in any zone as long as you're doing agricultural stuff. That's what I was told by the city.
Well, we are a winery.
Yeah, I know.
Whether we're in an industrial
I'm just suggesting that Commissioner Monet's thought of saying we need to restrict when they make noise. if they moved 100 feet, you could make noise 724, 365.
No, that's not correct. We'd still be subject to the county's noise
To the
element.
noise ordinance, but you could
correct.
work 724, 365.
Right, well, that's what I was saying.
In fact, as an ag, you could even make more noise because you could, have the egg beaters going when it got cold.
But that's what I said, Commissioner
so-
Ponte. I mean, that's what my point was, so that there may be no way to mitigate it. I was just saying
I don't
that
think
would be
there's
a way
I don't
to
think there's a reasonable way to do that for the use they're applying for.
If
they
you
need
don't-
it as part of their business.
If you don't have an identified impact, and impact is identified as exceeding your city noise ordinance maximum decibels. If you do not have an impact, then you don't have mitigation measures. This is common misperception, but if there is no established impact, which is based on the standard and the threshold, then there is no mitigation required. We don't have a requirement for mitigation.
I agree.
I understand your standard is different, but we're obligated to go with the standard that's established by the city and by CEQA
Well, my
guidelines.
understanding is that even if it doesn't go by the city noise ordinance, it's still allowed if it's agriculture. That's my understanding. So, I understand that there is no way to mitigate this.
But you're not allowed to exceed the standard.
It's a
Not allowed to
question
exceed.
as much as a statement, but I'm understanding, Noah, that the noise ordinance or noise standards do apply in the industrial zoning district regardless of use.
They absolutely do.
That's correct.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
And I believe Donna said that. She's been saying that
absolutely
all
do.
along.
The police
we're not-
department
we're not
told me
allowed to
differently
exceed them.
once, so
Yeah.
I'll let you know. All right.
So that's why we have no impact, and that's why we have no mitigation measures. Any further questions on this? But we can't.
Thank
we
you for
can't
that
operate
clarification. I
the
appreciate it.
facility if it's restricted during the harvest.
You have any
We're already
questions, David?
restricted on the noise.
Lester, do you have any more questions? I would like to make a motion that we continue this and allow the public to look at the documents. I would suggest that all comments be made by the 24th of this month and that we hear this and give them a decision on the 5th of December. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call. Whoops.
It's like soldiers on the battlefield. We lose people from time to time.
What happened? Oh, I didn't.
All right.
I suggest we start over.
I made a motion that we continue this until the 5th of December, and that all comments be to the planning department by the 24th of this month. And I believe David...
I seconded it.
She seconded it.
She over there.
Oh, I'd like a roll call, please.
Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes, but only because of the hour.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Thank you.
So that takes staff on to scheduled matters. And I'm sorry.
I wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for the fires. Jesse, would you try and get that in the paper? Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, so that takes staff on to an administrative determination that was made for 1153 Main Street. Mr. Gott requested to open and operate the convenience store at the existing convenience store location of 1153 Main Street at the former Napa Valley Petroleum convenience store. It's still Napa Valley Petroleum gas station. Staff reviewed the request and has made a determination that it qualifies as a continuing use to allow the operation of that facility as a convenience store. Staff has committed to presenting the Planning Commission with those at any time that staff makes them, and also informing the public. So this notification will be sent to all property owners and residents within 300 feet to allow an appeal opportunity.
Okay. Do we need to do anything with it?
It's just a receive and file.
How convenient.
Put some good stuff in there, Joel.
Will there be hamburgers?
No hamburgers is my understanding.
What kind of
I'll go out
conveniences?
back and set up a thing and we'll do hamburgers.
I did have to ask Mr. Gott for a definition of sundries when he sent me his list of items.
What did he say?
I have a definition, and I don't remember because it was a while ago.
Oh, no. Wikipedia.
So I just wanted to let you know that's there, and it's been noticed, and I'll communicate with Mr. Gott when the appeal period ends. Yep, it's 14 days from the November 3rd.
Will you be changing it at all, or no?
Moving on to the department reports. Just a reminder to the commission and the public that there's no meeting on November 21st. That's the Tuesday prior to Thanksgiving. We voted previously to cancel that. Similarly, there's no meeting on January 2nd, 2018. I apologize for talking about the next year already. I'm a planner. I have a few on the commission here. And along those lines, the Sonoma State Planning Conference is scheduled for December 2nd, 2017. I had sent out a reminder to put that on your calendar if you're interested. The Sonoma State has now published the agenda for that, and it's on your dais. So please let me know if you're interested in attending. Staff does include a budget for all commissioners to attend that, as if they would like to. It's an excellent conference and very, very affordable. Probably the best, the most cost-effective one that I'm aware of. And so we can, you can register individually, and staff, the city will reimburse you, or you can let me know and I'll register you.
Is it a one-day conference?
It's a one-day conference. It's a Saturday. And then finally, the draft general plan and draft environmental impact report for that general plan are published on the website. The Planning Commission had asked that an updated version be published just so folks can see no changes were made to the general plan, but what changes have been made to the EIR in response to basically staff's effort to try to bring it into contemporary expectations and standards. And I should correct myself, actually changes were made to the general plan based on direction from the city council to eliminate the low-medium land use designation that had been put into it previously, so that has been taken out and all references have been taken out. We did have a little bit of trouble with the graphics, and so the graphics may not be 100% accurate, so just understand it is a draft document, but staff wanted to get that back into the public realm so folks can start reviewing it. The comment or the response time or period for the general plan EIR ended on Monday, and staff received 3 responses to that, so we're going to be grading them moving forward through that process to secure a consultant to prepare that document. And we are doing the same with the Hunter EIR. So that process is ahead of the general plan EIR process, but just so everyone, including the public, knows that those RFPs are ended, the responses for both are in, and we're moving forward with grading and selecting a consultant.
Does that mean that the general plan EIR is not going to take 2 years?
Well, I haven't gone through all the proposals to see what the timelines proposed are, but that is 100% my goal, to get it done as quickly as possible.
Okay. Interesting.
I have nothing else.
Anyone else have anything? Meeting's adjourned. Go
Amen.
home.